Good morning. This is our September, I think we're going to start our meeting now. This is our September monthly budget committee meeting. And so I welcome you back from the summer and hope all have been healthy and safe since our last meeting in July. We're going to start the meeting. Actually, we have no executive session. There was no pending litigation or any kind of discussions coming out of the law committee. So we'll go directly to our request for budget adjustments. Our first request today is from the Human Services Department. And they have a request for a transfer for for regular salaries. And I think we're going to need to bring up our attendees from the department. So presenting this will be, I guess, Alan Gunsberg, who is the chairman and so we need to bring him up, and Demetria Nelson, who is our new department head. So we're welcoming, may not pronounce her name correctly, but welcoming. So if you could bring up those two people, Jenny, that'd be great.
Okay. Demetria.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. And who else? I'm sorry.
Alan Gunsberg. He was the chairman.
Oh, there he is. Okay, sorry.
Hello, everyone.
Good morning and welcome. Is this your first sort of public meeting? And could you just please introduce yourselves? Maybe just give us 30 seconds about your background, and then we certainly welcome you to our first meeting that we're having with you.
Thank you.
And I'm Leslie Tarkington, and let me introduce our other budget committee members. We have Leslie Moriarty, we have Jeff Raymer, and we have Deborah Hess. And then regularly participating in our meetings are Roland Geiger, our budget director, and Peter Benarski, our comptroller. And then, obviously many other department people and board chairman like you are presenting with us today. And welcome, Alan. Hope you've had a good summer.
Thank you. Is Mr. Robinson out here?
I didn't see him before when I looked at attendees.
Mr. Robinson is our vice chair, and he was going to join us maybe.
Well, he's not on the list right now, Alan, as an attendee. He has not signed in.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, can we come back to Demetria?
To Demetria.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll quickly introduce myself. So my name is Demetria Nelson. I'm the new commissioner of the Department of Human Services. I am an LCSW and also have a master's in organizational psychology from Columbia University Teachers College. And in addition to the master's in social work from Columbia University School of Social Work, I'm coming to you formally from Bronx Care Health System, that was known as Bronx Lebanon Hospital Center. I was there for 13 years and was the administrative director of the Addiction Treatment Services Department. And I used to work here at the department. It was in 2002 from 2004 as a case manager. And it was as I was making the transition from organizational psychology into social work. So very pleased to be here.
So I guess I should say, welcome back.
Thank you.
So we're pleased to have you, rejoin the town of Greenwich. That's great. So you have a taste for our culture and how we operate, and for our really great fellow town hall employees. So you want to present your application today?
Yes, and Alan, please feel free to jump in at any time. So I'll just quickly give a general overview. So we know that there was a 1.8% initially when we developed the budget, an increase for fiscal year 21. And then the department was informed that the budget should be flat. So we had to identify a decrease of $70,715. Initially, the BET made a decrease within the case management salaries. The Department of Human Services board approved the following revision to the budget. In the case management salaries, a decrease of $15,000. In the administration salaries, a decrease of $22,719, and a decrease in the community partnerships of $33,000. So we're currently requesting the transfer of the $22,719 from administrative salaries to the case management salaries, and also the $33,000 from community partnerships to case management salaries. Department 502, Code 101.
And if I could jump in for just a moment.
Of course,
This was the budget that was laid out by exactly line by line by Dr. Berry to the RTM Health and Human Services Committee. They voted, I think it was 507 to nothing. It was a unanimous vote that they approved our budget as we put it together. And then we went to take a look at our budget after everything had settled, and arbitrarily, the way that we had set it up, it was now set up the way that Demetria has had explained it, that things were just moved from one to the other, and things were moved out of the case manager's salary, which we can't have. We revoted to, I think it was the board revoted in our in our July meeting to put the budget back exactly the way Dr. Berry had presented it to the Health and Human Services Committee, which is exactly the way Demetria, Commissioner Nelson has put forward to you the budget transfers we'd like to do.
Okay, so I mean, I'll ask commission members for comments and input, but I mean, the RTM really has no authority to change budgets. We present a budget, and then they can then make their modifications and changes, item by item, which I don't believe they made such changes. But I'll take questions or comments from my fellow members, and I see Deborah Hess's hand up.
Hi, Demetria, welcome back. We were on the HR committee meeting this morning, so this is my second time with you today.
Yes.
I do have a few questions. So I remember when when kind of COVID hit and we had to kind of relook at our budget, and we had to go back to departments, and I thought at the time we thought for your department that there'd be some savings with changes in management positions, and that would have taken care of a fair amount of the reduction that you had to do, and maybe there'd be a little bit that you would have to take away from external entities, but that you wouldn't go below where you were the prior year. By doing so it's two questions. One, by reducing external entities 33,000, you're now reducing it year over year. And then so I'm not sure, do we need to do this now? You talked in HR about potentially maybe some savings elsewhere in terms of housing. There's the block grant. And then the other thing I want to talk about is I've understood that there hasn't been payments made yet to the external entities. So I have just a few questions, and maybe you want to just start with salaries versus external entities first. And do you really, at this point, need to be making a reduction to external entities?
Okay, in terms of the overall decrease with the salaries with the management position, one was the Director of Community Programs, and the other was my position. There was an overall decrease in case management administration salaries of $37,719. but there was still a need to reduce the budget by $33,000.
Right. So I guess the point is, I'm just, what is it that you're trying to do? Because your budget is already reduced. So, but now post budget, you're trying to move money out of salaries from admin salary to another salary bucket, and then reduce your external entities.
Right.
Correct.
So the major object code that was identified to reduce the budget, it couldn't function appropriately with that full deduction of the $70,715. So we had to identify another area to take the additional $33,000 from.
Okay, so all right, so what you're saying is you're putting it back in the line item that you don't think that the budget that was approved, but then didn't you have 30,000 that could come out of the management line, so that could cover 37 of the 55,719? So meaning you had savings, right? Because I do recall that the savings from the positions was covering most of that reduction. So I guess the question, can you move the 37 out of that top line into what you're saying, case management, and that covers most of what you need?
Right. So in terms of the case management line, the 70,000 that was moved out, we did have a deduction in that line of 15,000. So that's why we don't have to move the total 70,715 to that line. And we just have to move the $53,000 back to make that line whole in order to be able to handle the expenses related to salaries. So, yeah.
But couldn't you just move another 17,000 out of the admin line and the amount that you're giving to external entities? Because it seems like you have another amount still in the admin line. Because if you had 37 in the admin line, you only took out 22. Don't you have another 15 that you can move out of admin and then not reduce external entities?
There's not an additional 17 or 15 that we have that we can move out of admin. We're just meeting budget if we move the 22,719.
I thought you said it. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was, as you know, Commissioner Nelson showed up at the end of August. So we went through a lot of these. We were quite surprised that we, as a board and as a department, that during a pandemic that we would have to have our budget, first of all, reduced by $70,000. Second of all, when we looked at how could we reduce it, we knew that we were going to have some changes in our staffing, like the commissioner said, in her position and another position, and we had to figure out how much savings there would be. So when we figured out, I think it was $37,000 in savings, and we moved it over, we were still a little short. We looked at every line, and understanding that we are still in the middle of a pandemic, and trying desperately to take care of the clients that we had prior to the pandemic and all of the new clients that have shown up since the beginning. We felt that we couldn't take money from client financial aid, which was the only other part that we could look at. And we looked towards the external entities, or as we call it, our community partners. And that was a place that we felt that we could move money and still keep all of our people employed and working.
I'm sorry, it's just the point that just is confusing to me, and then I'll go to my last point is, if there was 37,000 though, why aren't you just moving that? Why aren't you shifting the 37 where you need it to go, and you're only moving out 22? That's the point I'm just trying to understand. How does that 37 tie to the 22?
Okay, the 15,000 of the deduction in the case management position, that salary is already deducted. It's from that line, so it doesn't need to be moved back and transferred into that line. So the initial amount of the $70,000 was taken out from the case management line. And there was 15,000 that we were able to reduce the salaries in that line. So it's the difference between that needs to go back in.
Okay. And then I'm sorry. So my last one is my understanding is that the entity, your partners haven't been paid yet. And so even if you had looked at your budget and wanted to make some changes, you're reasonably confident about some amount that's going to go to the partners. And these partners, they're struggling in town, right? Most of them making money where they can. So why wouldn't you have at least made some, I mean, what do you typically pay it once a year, twice a year, beginning a year? How does that work, and why haven't you given them money yet?
So in the month of July, we would have front loaded all of the programs. We would have prepaid the first quarter, and we pay it on a quarterly basis. We pay it against a report that is necessary for each partner to generate, to tell us what's been done in the previous quarter, so that we can look and make sure that they are living up to, are they serving our clients? Are they serving town residents? Are they being effective with the money that we're giving them? So we would have done that, but Dr. Barry felt that his budget had been changed so drastically that he needed to figure this out first. At that point, figure the budget out, get it clean the way it should be. And if you approve this today, we can start writing checks.
I guess but the point is, you're only asking for 33,000 on over 700,000. So you knew theirs was some amount that you were going to distribute to them.
It was Dr. Barry's call.
Okay.
At the time.
I
deferred to him.
Right.
Okay. I just would think that we would want to, if we've committed to these organizations, that we would want to follow through with our commitments, especially in a time like this when they're counting on us.
No, we do support what you're saying, Deborah. And I think Alan and I were taking the opportunity to present at this meeting. Then we're going to rethink the strategy and the thought behind holding off on the payment.
I guess, so do we need, I guess the question is, do you need to make this shift and reduce your external entities at this point? Or do you need to have a little time to think the department, fund most of the external entities, maybe leave a little bit behind and because you also have the block grant money, and I'm not clear how that's going to tie in with money you already have in your budget, and how, because that's $50,000, and how that might help your budget and help the people.
Right. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Alan.
The block grant money is only for a specific type of payment. It's only to help people who are going to lose their homes and their apartments. It also has federal ties to it because it comes directly from HUD. So we can't give people any of the $50,000 from the HUD block grant for food. We can't give them that money for anything other than rental or home assistance to keep them from being dispossessed.
So thank you, Leslie or Jeff. I don't see your hands up, but do you have any comments, Leslie, or questions?
I do. I was waiting for Deborah to be complete.
Sorry.
That's okay. Because I approach this slightly differently, though. I think I get to a similar endpoint as Deborah. The external entities budget, I think of as being different than your operating budget, and that there isn't really an expectation that money should be shifting between external entities and the operating budget, especially when we go back to the conversations between the BET budget committee and the department as we develop the budget. Now, at the very end of the day, the budget was modified with no discussion over the impact on the level of services we provide. BET acted very quickly and just held budgets flat. That being said, the assumption you walk away with budgets being held flat is you would assume that the external entity budget should be held flat and the department's budget should be held flat. So that really external entities should be reduced by 15,558, not 33,000. That it shouldn't have been a source of funds to meet the needs of the department. And if the department has needs, the recourse, I think, really should have been to come back for an interim appropriation that should be discussed over the level of services needed, why you need it, where the possible sources are, so that you might have access to those additional funds. But I think to reduce the external entities by more than just holding their budget flat was not in alignment with the BET's action in the majority members who voted for this in April 27th. So that being said, at this point, I wouldn't want to approve this entire request that you're coming to me for. I would want to modify that reduction. We don't have to approve the movement of funds between 501 and 502. I believe Demetria has the authority to move money between the sub-department codes within Human Services. Roland, you can clarify that if I'm wrong in that assumption. It's really just this movement, the contribution to external entities is the major object code change that does require the BET approval. And I think the approach here is different than what the intent of the budget guidelines were, and that our processes really allow. And maybe
Leslie,
colleagues.
can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
When we formulated our budget, which is a big to-do for our board and our department, and we start when the fiscal year begins, because we review any new RFPs that we might get from our partners, and we look at the renewal RFPs from our partners, and we want to make sure that we're living within the guidelines. When it came time to figure out what kind of budget we wanted to have in November, we looked at increasing the budget by close to 3%. We've never had a budget increase in the past 10 years, or 9 years that I've been here. We've always been flat, consistently every year, and we've returned money to the town of Greenwich through our SWACA contract. So we've been a good citizen every single year. We've done what we've been asked to do. And then when we put our 3% budget down to the selectmen, they said, no, you have to come back with 1.8. Okay, so we figured out that 1.8 means that we have to give people raises, but everything else will be flat. So we had a flat budget. We had the partners flat. We didn't give anybody extra money per se. We had the same pool of money that we were looking to do because that's what we were told to do. And then on top of that, to add injury to what I thought was an insult, there was a decision to reduce our budget in the middle of a pandemic by $70,000. And we have to pay our employees. And we have to make sure that there's money in that line so that we can keep up with the growing number of people that we're feeding, that we're making sure have safe spaces and are staying healthy. And the idea that we are arbitrarily looking at anything other than trying to take care of people that come to our department, I mean, we did the best we could. And you decided, not you, but the BET decided that $70,000 was more than we could have. So it had to come from somewhere.
Yeah, no, I understand your frustration, and I'm sure, look, there's a lot of sympathy and I think appreciation for the services that your department provides. Every department's feeling the same thing. We didn't fund anybody's salary increases for reason that some members felt was justified. But we're still sitting here with what's the proper way to implement this. And, I think there's some question in my mind on whether some of your external entities can deliver the services in the same way that they anticipated. I don't know if all the programs can be delivered given the COVID environment. And I also think that there's an appreciation that your expenses and your needs may increase in the COVID environment. And we want to have that. I think we should have that conversation. The BET should solicit that. We should schedule that, Ms. Tarkington, and to understand what the real impact is and how we may need to meet those needs. But I don't want to set, I'm thinking about the best way to go about this. I think that request needs to be handled separately from the way that you're proposing it here today. And I don't know whether my fellow Budget Committee members feel the same way.
So Jeff, do you have any comments or, questions or things you'd like to add here?
So the whole process of moving this list of external entities into the human services, formerly the social services budget, is a moderately new process. It has a logic to it that it asks the department that understands the needs much better than we do, and the extent to which they're looking to these partners to render these social services on behalf of the town. They have a much better sense of what funds are needed. And the COVID makes it very much a case in point that the advent of COVID is kind of a sea change in the environment in which they're operating. And they will have, perhaps I'm making this up now, they'll have some recipients which are being funded for programs that can't go forward or can't go forward in the same way. They have others on that list in which the need is dramatically greater. They'll be looking to those partners for dramatically more, and given a do-over, they would increase that funding. So in some measure, there's a logic to having an increased logic in the face of COVID, to having these funds going out, not as a separate item in the BET budget, but rather as a subhead, as it is right now under the administrative component of human services. The only thing that's missing here, and then something else needs to be said too. In the rush to try and complete a budget process at the time that the BET was approving its budget, a majority of the members of the BET came forward with cuts. I don't know that arbitrary is quite the right word. I'm not finding quite the right word, but a number of departments were simply reduced to what their budget had been in the prior year. That wasn't exactly what was done with human services. Other departments which were to be receiving actually less in the new year were kept at the less. And then there were a handful of departments that were reduced by a specific dollar amount. The Department of Human Services was one of those. You were reduced to a number that was lower than either the proposed upcoming budget or the then existing budget for you. And I don't know what was the logic by which those numbers were arrived at. That was not a discussion in which I was able, given the opportunity to participate. So I'm not quite sure where that leaves me now, but I think I think altogether, something that I'll raise later on here at the Budget Committee, I think altogether there needs to be an early dialogue with the departments to try and understand what has been the effect of COVID. What programs and things in your original budgeting were you going to go forward with that you didn't go forward with? Where did you find economies that accommodated some of these cuts? And what additional expenses have you incurred or are you facing as a result of COVID that are not being accommodated by the budget that you're being given? To apply that in this particular case, I kind of think that I'd like to see a slightly adjusted dialogue take place with your department, and that is recast and review with us again how you would structure this reduced budget in the face of COVID. And in the case of the external entities particularly, which of the external entities would you reduce an amount? Which would you increase an amount? Is the final amount a lower number, the same number, a higher number? I just think there needs to be a better dialogue so that we can understand your needs and that which is taking place here. Now, so particularly, for example, you're talking about a $33,000 cut in external entities. when we're casting the budget, we had a full list of what those entities were and what were the sums that they're receiving. We're not understanding how that $33,000 are being applied. And then we'd like to be able to look through the expertise of your eyes to understand, and of those external entities, which of the programs are you assuming you're going to need less, and which of the programs you're going to need more, and how should the funding follow that? We don't want to micromanage you, but I think we would need to understand a little better what's happening than we're being allowed to understand right now, most particularly in the external entities, but probably in your budget altogether. I'm sympathetic to the fact that in COVID, you're probably needing more dollars in case management, and maybe would be motivated to find expenses elsewhere. And I think, in fact, that's exactly what you're proposing to do in the request that you've made here today.
So, are you finished, Jeff? Are you finished? Or?
I'm done.
Okay, good. So, I think we've heard from Deborah and, Leslie and Jeff, and I think their comments are really very valuable and very important. And they've each brought up a perspective that, in my opinion, is complementary of each other's perspectives and, pretty unified in terms of a direction. I would just like to add here that the human services budget was not reduced. The human services budget was held flat with fiscal year 20, and it was held flat at an amount of $3,936,000 plus. So there was no cut. It was just held flat like every other department. I would also like to comment here that what we haven't heard about is temporary salaries. As I think it was Deborah, but it may have been Leslie who mentioned that you can, it was Leslie, that you can transfer between accounts in the 100s, and you can work with Roland on that. But the temporary salary account increased by 2% to $757,000. So, looking at temporary salaries, that might be a way to also, fill your objective without necessarily having the need for coming to the BET. So that is just, a question there. And the other is, I will, sort of follow up on the point that I believe in this case Jeff made. And that is that, as we determined the external entities, there was substantial discussion about each and every one when Human Services came to the Budget Committee meetings in, I believe it was February, could have been January, I don't remember the exact date. So in this case, there was no list provided. But I do also say that being responsible for external entities also has, a lot of we'll call it the public trust of the town of Greenwich. And, we moved some of these external entities into Human Services some years back. And, sort of as we can and have the authority to do, because exactly as Alan has said, because there was a process in place and we could handle it better. But with that comes a certain amount of trust. If these organizations that are also suffering, as many departments are today at the town of Greenwich, and as many of our support services in the town of Greenwich, our 501c3s are, they were expecting getting a quarter of, say, their approved budget in July. They probably expected to get that money. And here we are, almost 3 months later, and they have not received that money. And that, to me, raises a red flag. And I'm quite concerned about that. I would also say that, if there had been a list, and if that list showed that, you were going to take some money, and perhaps, again, I encourage you to look at temporary salaries, but also because they perhaps have more flexibility, but also at the list of external entities. And no one has suggested this, but, the town also manages additional external entities that weren't transferred to the Human Services Department for one reason or another. They're large, traditional, whether it's the Bruce Museum or GEMS, which provide certain services, or our wonderful GCTV. But in each of those cases, similar to the departments, we held their increase of the additional 2% back. So, looking at your list of external entities, which you didn't provide, if there is a situation where perhaps some of them were getting this 2% increase where the department wasn't getting it elsewhere, perhaps this would be an area where we would make the exception of the money not coming out of salaries. And remember, every other department in the town of Greenwich is coming out of salaries, or the 100s accounts. So, perhaps that would be something to look at. But at this point in time, and this timing in September, I don't see the, necessarily the urgency, but I don't have all the information perhaps. I would suggest that what this budget committee is suggesting is that you go back and think about this, that, Alan is no longer the department head, that Demetria take into consideration the many comments that were made, in today's meeting, that obviously she worked with you, Alan, and the board, and, in the spirit of this, see what can be held off, what can be handled within the 100s. And, obviously expecting Demetria will be talking and visiting with Roland on this too. And then think about this. And I think that what you've also heard is that we're very supportive of your department, as we are of all town departments, and the dedicated staff that everyone has. And I guess what we would encourage you to do is think about this, work it through, certainly think about making that July 1st payment, which I guess also will be coming with an October 1st payment, to the very important external entities. And then obviously we'd be very receptive to visiting with you again. And I don't know, I'm speaking out of turn. I have not talked with, Deborah and Leslie and Jeff. I'm just, speaking in this sort of same order as they spoke about this kind of plan. But, I would ask them if they, what they think about this kind of approach.
Can I ask two questions?
So can I just, before you do, just
No.
Mike, I know you're going to do us first, but I just want to make sure, Leslie, that Mike has had his hand up for a while.
Right, we're right.
Okay. Sorry, Leslie.
So the two questions I have, one goes to, they go to Roland. One is, I want to confirm the assumption that the transfer in this request, the $22,719 between 501 and 502, does not need to come to the BET. Is that correct? You're muted right now, Roland.
Roland?
Yes, that's true. The 27 doesn't have to go to the BET.
Okay, so Demetria has the authority to do that. And timing-wise, this money is going into salary accounts. You have the full year's accrual on your books right now. My understanding is you're coming to us early in the year, so you know what parameters you have for your budget. You're not in a cash crunch or a budget crunch at the moment, but you're just looking for the guidance. Is that correct? And that's more to Alan or to Demetria.
I would say that we were, again, I can't, we developed the budget. We presented it, including the external entities, or as you call them, or our community partners. We presented it to the department, to the RTM, Health and Human Services. They looked at all of the reductions that we talked about. They looked at how we wanted to move our salary numbers around. Dr. Barry explained it, and they were fine with it. I don't know why that particular budget didn't make itself into your hands. for each of you to look at. I don't know, but I think when you gave the Commissioner of Human Services, when Peter Tessie and the BET gave the Commissioner of Human Services the external entities, the few that were the big ones that he still had, along with the community partnerships that we were already handling, it was because, exactly like you said, we have a process, we have the expertise, we know what our clients are doing, we know what they need, and we try to develop programs that will help them. We are currently going back. It's been a few months. We didn't work over the summer with the new RFPs, and we haven't talked to the partners, but we've started for the month of September with the new commissioner, scheduling appointments with all of our partners, finding out what programs are still viable, how they have become viable, what types of technology they might be using to deliver them, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to take a process because there's 30 or so partners, but we're working on it. But you know, we take this responsibility. It's a very big one, and we know that, and we know that giving us the ability to check and to deliver and to set dollar amounts is a big responsibility, and we're very careful at who we have as our partners, and we're constantly trying to figure out are the reports that we're getting good enough for not only for us to read, but for external people to read, so that they read well enough that they can see that the objectives were met by the partners. We have no problem delivering first quarter money. I would say that when we do, we will be delivering it on the percentage of how we reduced the external entities budget until we get this thing solved, so that we're not going to give somebody less money at the end of the year just because we front loaded them with more money than we had to give them. But we put a lot of time and a lot of effort as a board, both into interviewing, monthly reports, and again, having a certain amount of money and trying desperately to be Moses and not cut the baby in half. So I appreciate everybody's remarks, and we can go back and take a look at how we might be able to save a few dollars in some places. But I know eventually the place that this money needs to come from to pay our salaries will come from the external entities. Whether it's 33,000 or it's 23,000, I have no idea yet. But that's really the only place in our budget that I can see it coming from.
Again, we have a couple of hands raised, and I want to make sure. Roland, did you raise your hand there? And then I'm going to go to Mike, and
Yeah, I did, but Alan sort of addressed this. Normally they sign contracts with all of the external entities saying, over the course of the year, you're going to receive X amount of dollars. And with this external entity dollar amount in somewhat of flux as to what it finally is, it makes it more difficult for them to sign these contracts. That's all I'm going to say.
So just Demetria, perhaps, will you confirm that contracts were not signed that normally would be signed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
They
so
were.
contract, but nevertheless, the BET and the RTM approved a budget as we knew it of the external entities as it came to us, and no changes. The RTM did not make any changes to your budget in the formalized process. I don't know about your committee discussions, but again, I don't know about that. I'd like to call on our chairman, Mike Mason, next, and ask that, Jenny, could you please bring up Mike?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So how do I cover this? Let's see. So in my normal day-to-day fashion, I always look at, our departmental management and job certification and training and knowing the process. We have a new board chair. We have a new director. That's a separate conversation, but it's more important every day, especially as we have management turnover in town. So let's back up for a minute. The budgets for this department have not been flat for 10 years. We've already reclarified that. The previous board chair was contacted by me early on at about the RTM timeframe, and explained the situation and what was happening and how the BET had chosen to get rid of our 440 tab, external entities, and house the external entity contracts in Health and Human Services, as for the reasons Mr. Raymer, Ms. Moriarty, Ms. Hess, everybody pointed that out. And that's something, whether we want to consider doing that in the future or not. When the budgets were set up to be zero increase, your budget is exactly the same as it was last year. We're talking $3.9 million, and we're struggling over 17,000. I strongly feel that we're down to $17,000 of $3.9 million. I don't know how that reads with most of the members, but it is what it is. So the previous board chair was told what the intent was of the BET. The external entities, it was not recommended at that time that we're trying to balance a budget off of contracts we have with external entities. These are services that the town has decided it's wanted. I actually look at them sort of as subcontractors. These are programs and stuff that we want in town that we've decided. We've entered into a contract with them. Now, I understand the contract doesn't exactly show the payment increments, but it's certainly a contract for services. And now we've held that up, and we're now 75 days into the fiscal year. I don't think that's what we should be doing when we sign a contract for payments. We should have been sending something. And I'm hoping that'll be rectified by this afternoon, that we'll be in the process of doing that. So let's now talk about the department. The department, here we are in September, you put in an application for a transfer. And I think I'll go back to Ms. Moriarty started it correctly, and it's been verified. 501 and 502 and 509 are your departments. You can intermix 101s at 100 money as you see fit. The 700 major object code is where you need to transfer. I'm glad we've gotten that cleared up. But again, we're how many days into this budget, and we're not paying contractors. That's not good. I try to follow your minutes, your Health and Human Services board minutes, which are, in my opinion, don't meet FOI by any standards. There's an audio transcript. You don't approve minutes. The minutes are really there. So I can't get the flavor of what the board is digesting. And obviously all of us attend enough meetings. So I have an issue with that. And we'll have to have a conversation with that going forward. Minutes, I think you're barely just posting at meetings, and I can't follow. So I don't really get the flavor of what the board has. Here we are today. A letter has been sent to all the department heads by me with some help. And it tells all the department heads in the town, say, look, we understand you built the budget for a Greenwich pre-COVID. We understand that. And pre-last storm, by the way, too, just for the departments that are wrestling with the last storm. And we said, we understand fully that you've built the budget for a normal Greenwich. We're not in a normal time. We understand that. And in that letter, I said, what we're asking and the BET is asking is to keep track of all expenses related to COVID that are additional to what you would have budgeted. On the other hand, we're also asking for things in your budget that you budgeted for that might not be being spent. I don't know what you're doing with travel expenses, as an example. I don't know if what we're doing there, and those will be interdepartmental conversations. We also said in that same letter, any grants and applications that you're applying for, please keep track of those and keep us informed on those. And the idea is, as the year progressed, we would get ourselves in a position with all the departments where we could sit down and have a conversation about what transfers are needed and possible interim appropriations if needed. Obviously, I attended 2 or 3 RTM meetings last night, and I think the message is being conveyed correctly there. So my frustration level here is that I think that I understand how hard every department, we're all, some of the board members here and BET share a lot. We are all volunteers. We're trying to do what we thought was best as our revenues decline. So I would encourage everybody to step back on this one. I'm not sure. I understand there's a possibility of revising the form or possibly asking for an interim, but I think we need to look forward on this. And I think we need to, we have kids in crisis right now that is not receiving any money. And that's a vital program in town. It's brutal. And then and it is my feeling, I'm going to say this as a board chair, I think the BET has a concern with the amount of interaction that the town has with nonprofits for many services and programs is in jeopardy. I think a lot of our town nonprofits are just having a hard time raising funds right now, and they're struggling. And I'll even take that down to even some of the religious facilities are probably struggling. We need to keep that in our concern. In this particular case, I wouldn't support this transfer, even if it was modified. I think that it's probably not the time. And I encourage you, out of $3.9 million, to see if you can find this, what looks to be X amount of money. And that's just my opinion on this. But the budget committee will take action. And if it passes the budget committee, it will come to the full BET, and we'll have this conversation with all the members. But I think it's important from the BET point of view. There has been double reach out to the previous board chair, our letter in communication saying, here's how things are going, here's what our expectations are. And when I found out that contracts were signed and the payments weren't sent, or a partial payment wasn't sent, I thought that wasn't a wise decision. And I think that just brings a different communication into this that we don't need. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Mike. I think those comments were, right on the mark and very important to be relayed at this point in time. Also, combined with the other budget committee members' comments. Again, I would focus also on temporary services where there's $757,000 approved, and whether this small amount can come out of it. And also just, for the public, while we're sitting here, I too am receiving signed contract by Alan Berry, dated June 19th, for one of these, probably your largest external entity. And, it's very clear, while the amount had been slightly reduced from the BET's approval, it probably would have been appropriate to send at least 25% of your adjusted number, if, again, which did not come before the budget committee. So I'm going to ask a question here.
My hand has been up for a while. I don't know if you've noticed.
Jeff, I'm so sorry. I apologize. I thought I had just looked at hands again, and I didn't. I apologize.
Like you were winding up the conversation, and I didn't want to wind up until I had addressed something else, if that's all right.
Of course it is.
Can I do that now?
Of course.
Okay.
Yes.
There's a point to be made here, and that is that, especially for any public that might listen now or at a later point, we don't tax our citizens to make contributions to terrific charitable entities. What's happening here is that we purchase services from these nonprofits. So there's no money being spent out of town coffers for American Cancer Society or the United Way or Sierra Club or anything else, even though they may be wonderful organizations. We're purchasing services. And it isn't even fully relevant whether a contract was yet signed or not, because many of these organizations are actively rendering the services now to our people, whether you're talking about homeless shelter in Stamford or whether or not you're talking about a kids in crisis. They didn't stop operations because we didn't sign the contract or we didn't render the check, or we did sign the contract but didn't render the check. They're actively providing the services. So if the department is proposing a $33,000 change to an 891,000 and change list that we were given of external entities, I, for one, would like to know what then will become the revised list, because we approved the budget in a setting in which we were taxing our citizens nearly $1 million, $891,000, on an understanding that in the judgment of our Department of Human Services, we needed certain services from certain external entities, and this is the list of who they are. These are the programs that we're funding, and these are the dollar figures at which they'll be paid for those services. If that's changing by $33,000 or by some other number, I think fair would be to come back to us and say, this is the revised list of the recipients, the programs, and the dollar amounts. And there may be agencies for which, in your judgment, you're thinking they should be getting more. Or it's a terrific program, but in the face of COVID, they won't be able to render that service. And so we're going to suspend that payment for this year or for 6 months of it or whatever it is until they're in a position to render that important service. And if perchance you have not yet made the judgment about how you would reallocate the 33,000 or whatever the number is, then frankly, respectfully, that's a dereliction, and we would like that dereliction closed. So I'm looking forward to having you come back soon, maybe the next meeting, with very much the greater part of this request, but to do it in the context of, yes, we want to reduce these external entities, and this is the ones that are going to be reduced and by these amounts, and here's some that we're going to increase, and here's some that we're going to postpone. I'd like to have the specificity for it. I think it's fair. We're taxing our citizens for those dollars. We ought to be told how they're going to be applied.
So have I got anyone else who's got their hand raised at this moment? Leslie, do you have your hand raised?
I know that we've talked about this for a long time, but there are a couple statements that have been made, which I just feel I need to go on the record to show my disagreement. First, to say that the budgets were not reduced, I think it's just not correct. We know that there are wage increases for each of these departments, so holding a budget flat is reducing a budget. Secondly, I'm a little concerned that the department's going to walk away without real clarity, one, how they're going to cover their payroll of people who are already on the payroll, and their TOO is flat. It's not like they've increased that. And secondly, I don't know how they execute contracts with all of these agencies, not knowing the dollar amounts they have available. And if agencies are comfortable signing contracts for dollar amounts lower than what they believe they should be getting or felt it was in the pipeline for them to be getting. So I don't know if we're creating, asking for something that can't really be accomplished. I don't know.
Are you asking Leslie? I'm sorry.
Yeah, let me ask.
Are you asking Demetria if she can confirm yes or no that we have signed contracts with each of these entities? I mean, again, one was sent to me since this discussion began, so I assume that Alan Berry didn't send it out to only one entity, that he would consistently send it out to all of the external entities.
Let's clarify. Are there signed contracts with all of the external entities? Either Alan or Demetria?
I'm sorry, Alan, if you would.
I don't really know if they're signed. I know we went out, and I think Dr. Berry sent out contracts, and then he put everything on hold. Because we got our budget back with changes, not the way that we did present it in a certain way to Health and Human Services.
Right.
And we got it back, and it wasn't exactly the way we had presented it, although the contracts went out. So there may be contracts out. I don't know if they came back signed. I think we put this off, hoping that we could get in front of the BET earlier. This was in July. And here we are in September, and this was the first opportunity to have this discussion.
Yeah, I think
Leslie, just let me. The contract I have in front of me is signed and dated by Alan Berry on June 19th. So, again, June 19th, and it was signed by the other party on June 30th. Just so, we understand we're dealing with facts here, and I'm sure there's a collection of these somewhere in the Human Services files. Leslie, I see Deborah's hand, but I want Leslie to finish. I
Yeah,
just
let me
wanted to make the comment here.
I have a copy of what you discussed with the Human and Health and Human Services Committee, the RTM. And so there are only three entities. Actually, three entities that you modified the amounts from what I understand. So those may be the only contracts that are in question that may have come back from them or not signed by those agencies with those questions. So hopefully the others are in place and you can move forward on those. The one area that was just discussed by Mr. Mason, talking about your increased expenses due to COVID, those are referring to expenses you've incurred. I think there does need to be a further conversation about expenses maybe you haven't incurred because you don't have the resources or the ability to pay for them, but are services that are really needed in this COVID environment. And maybe if we can have that conversation that Mr. Raymer referred to of really what the needs are currently, that'll help us. I'm wondering, I don't know whether my fellow committee members will follow me on this, but in the spirit of keeping budgets flat, the amount of money or change from the 721 account, the external entity, to salaries would be $17,442. And I don't know if it gives the department comfort knowing that you at least have that amount of money to cover salaries, which are coming down the pike at this point, while there's still outstanding conversations to be had. Or if we're better off deferring this for a month, letting you go back and come with a proposal for really what you would modify in external entities to a new bottom line number, and then having that conversation. So that's
and I'm going to call on Deborah, and then I'm going to ask, I'm going to wrap this up. We've been discussing this one topic. We have a busy agenda for over an hour. So Deborah?
Yeah, so, and I'll react to Leslie's question too. I want to start with Jeff's point, though, he made, which I completely agree. It almost doesn't matter whether or not the contract's been signed or not. There's an expectation that the entities are going to getting this money, and we need to get them the money. And Leslie, your point, only 3 of them are changing. So I wouldn't make the adjustment now, Leslie. I think we defer. I think that you have to get to the partners and then come back. And I think the point, which I as well, agreeing with you twice today, about the services that are being delivered, and has it been since this was agreed? Like, is it money that you thought you were going to give, but they're not providing the service anymore, so therefore they don't need it, but somebody else might need more because they are providing a service that's more needed under the current environment. So I don't know how I think maybe we defer for a month, you come back, we have a little bit more clarity, but you try to figure out how much of this money, at least 25%, that you can give these agencies so that, the partners, so that they have it, so that they can survive during this time.
Again, I would just add to Deborah's comments, the other alternative is, do you have the flexibility at this point in time with a approved budget of $757,000 in temporary salaries to transfer that 17,000, bringing that number down to still $740,000, so that this discussion is not necessary. And I would certainly encourage you to look at that along with everything that, my colleagues have, been suggesting to you. So the question is, do we have a motion on this, or are we asking the department head to withdraw the application? I mean, what do we want to do? Is there a motion to approve this?
I have one more comment. I know that you want to move to resolution, but your assumption of what you're communicating to the department is that because the BET took every single reduction to the recommended budget in 101, that the BET's expectation, it all comes out of the 100 account. And that was not my recollection of the conversation at the budget committee, or at the full BET. My recollection is we expect to have departments come in for transfers during the year as things roll out. They need to take that adjustment. But we made those decisions without any knowledge of the impact on services and programs or where in people's budgets those savings would come. So I don't want to leave the Department of Human Services with the impression that they have to take this entire amount out of just the 100s account and the external entities budget remains unchanged from the higher amount that was given to us in a recommended budget when everything else was also higher.
Yeah, and Leslie, really, I can agree with you on that point. I think in my earlier comments, I did make the comment that, our other town external entities were held flat also, which is that $17,000 that you're talking about. So I think the only point here is that we've all talked about, there is flexibility within the budget, whether it's next month or more time to go through, give Dimitri a little bit more time here to think and really talk through this and work with the external entities. But I think we're all saying that the external entities rightfully deserve, because they've been conducting their businesses, at least the first quarterly payment, and thinking ahead to the second quarterly payment. If it's adjusted perhaps, by your original list, that's your alternative. That money could be made up later in the year. But I think we're all saying that these entities are also suffering in today's environment, and they're providing the services that you want delivered, and you want that credibility for the future. So I think we're all encouraging to be, at least the minimum payment. Quite frankly, I don't know whether it needs to be next month or the month thereafter. There is flexibility in this budget, but clearly we're always receptive to looking at the overall issue. But we also want to make sure that we're, being responsible to the other services that your department has been, and all of the residents of Greenwich, or a portion of it, have been so, dependent upon, and they're important support services. So I now come to the question I asked before. Are we going to, how are we going to handle this application? I would, we have certainly an opportunity to, approve it or not approve it as presented. We have the opportunity to have it withdrawn, and then maybe presented next month or the following month, whenever you're ready, or, some other alternative. I know we're in our decision-making process, so normally we wouldn't come back to the board or the department head. But Alan, do you have something that follows our discussion here that,
I would go with what you said. Let's table this. Let us go back. Let us sit with our controller, our financial person, Tatiana, and with Demetria. Look at the line items. Look at the line items that you asked us to look at within our budget. See if we can find some more savings. Maybe it's, I don't know. I really don't know. So, but we'll go do that. And once we figure that out, then we can take a look back at the external entities, but also at the same time, we'll see if we have contracts, and we'll see if we have signatures. I don't want, these are our partners. They're not our entities. They deliver service for our clients. They're people like our food bank. They're people that deliver diapers to mothers who have newborns. These are very important partners and people that we work with on a daily, weekly basis that we refer our clients to. So we also were really sitting on the fence about sending money out in a correct manner that made sense, that didn't seem willy-nilly. So we're going to look at our contracts, we're going to see what we have, and we're going to get some money out to everybody at the same time, and we'll come back in a month and we'll see what we have.
Would it serve
Right,
your,
so-
would it
Can
serve
I
your,
just-
if we were to have a motion to continue this to the next meeting? Was that too fast for you?
No,
Jeff, alternatively, I would ask, because I think Alan has said table, Alan, perhaps another alternative might be to withdraw this particular application and then bring it back next month or the following month. I mean, I think it's important for you to have the adequate time. I think you've got adequate budget here to work with, so you can come back next month or the following month. But the easiest, cleanest way might be for you to withdraw this if, my other colleagues are, supportive of that, and we welcome you back when you are ready to come back.
So Leslie, I would support tabling it, provided that we know that payments will be made to the community partners.
oh,
I
okay.
wouldn't be comfortable. Okay, I wouldn't be comfortable tabling it if payments weren't going to be made.
There's no
it-
such thing as tabling this and
Yeah.
having therefore pop back up. A motion that's tabled simply becomes a nullity at the end of the
Right.
meeting adjournment. So, I mean, it seems to me
I-
that
whatever
if
you wanna call it.
Mr. Gunsberg wishes to withdraw it, it isn't up to
We'll
us.
withdraw it.
Him.
Absolutely. But we will, Deborah, we will pay people.
Okay,
Uh,
that's
please.
what I just,
That
okay.
was always our intention. That was the biggest thing that Dr. Barry and I were trying to deal with. We didn't want to just pay people against contracts that we didn't think were valid, as Mr. Geiger said. It's a, we have a fiduciary responsibility here when we write these checks, and we don't take that lightly.
Thank
No,
you.
And I know you don't. So I appreciate that. So thank you so much. So
So
I
thank-
know we spent a lot of time on this today.
So thank you, Alan, very much for your time. Thank you, Demetria. It was nice to meet you. And we're ready to come, have you come back next month or the following month. I mean, I think we're receptive, but do take the time that you need and to think it through. And again, we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much.
And I also recommend anybody here on the board, pick up the phone, schedule some time to talk to Demetria, get to know her. She's a terrific individual. That's why we hired her. I know, a lot of people think she has large shoes to fill, but she's got very big feet.
I don't know if you'd say that, but okay.
I'm not sure how I feel about that. No.
Exactly.
We think we did an awesome job, and I think you will enjoy speaking to her and getting to know how she's doing and how she's fitting in, and maybe giving her some of the pointers and the tips that she needs in order to be a successful commissioner.
Right. So I thank you all for the time, and we will work to ensure the payments are made, and we'll come back with a new proposed plan.
Thank you.
Thank you,
so much.
Demetria. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you both, and Alan.
Thank you.
So moving on to Nathaniel Witherall. And so who do we have from Nathaniel Witherall with us today?
Larry Simon's on the call as an attendee.
Oh, yeah. So we need to bring up Larry Simon, please. Or Larry, you keep moving around here. You're,
He's in.
hiya. Hi, Larry. How are you doing?
Well, I was going to say good morning, but maybe we'll start with good afternoon.
Well, yes, good afternoon. So I know you've had a very busy summer and a lot happening at Witherall, but you're here actually on good news, I guess, getting a community development block grant to do some construction on the pavilion. So you want to explain what's happening here, please?
So as you know, the BET approved the Community Development Block Grant, and the RTM approved it in June. And but this is a reimbursement grant. So in order to spend the money, we need an authorization. And therefore I'm requesting this appropriation. And then the town will spend the money, and then it will request reimbursement for the Community Development Block Grant. And then the town will be whole and not out any money.
Great. So thank you. And it's good news that the money is available for this project. So do we have any questions from Deborah, Leslie, or Jeff? Jeff?
In due course, I mean, they're rehashing a point that was raised at the time that we were approving the community development block grant. There has always been a residual question for me about exactly that, given that this sub facility doesn't work in an economic way, it's charging rental figures which are sub-market, and the cost of the operation of the facility exceeds the rent stream that's coming. So it bestows, therefore, a benefit on its residents. And the question that I've always had is, how do we determine who are the people who are eligible to be the residents? And is there some coherent way in which a decision is made based upon need that the benefit should be bestowed? I'm not going to quite open that conversation now. I'm only going to touch on the fact that that's a conversation that the community needs to have because we're spending dollars to continue this facility, and it's never been clear as to whether or not that's exactly how the town dollars should be spent.
So I think, Jeff, that's a good, and Larry, good topic for the February budget cycle, and to, have Witherall prepared to respond to that. I think I can add to that neither the, I'll call it the Cavunas plan for Witherall, nor the original renewal plan for Witherall was the pavilion included. Rather, I think there was demolition in both cases. But I don't think those are topics for this. We've all approved the this funds with a community development block grant. And, this is now putting in place the process that Larry as chairman and the board and Witherall itself needs to have in place in order to be able to use these funds. So if I don't have any further comments, may I have a motion?
I would.
Deborah, do you have a comment?
No, I was making a motion.
Okay, that's great.
Sorry,
That's
Larry, you had to sit through the whole first hour, but I'm going to make a motion.
And I would second it. I'm supportive of these dollars being authorized to be spent.
And
I just want to be sure that I touch this open sore for.
No, I think that's it. We'll put that in, with our comments here for thinking ahead budget guidelines, or more importantly, I think we just make sure it's a topic for the budget discussion and hearings in February. So may I assume that this is, I'm sorry,
Leslie.
can I just ask, we have a motion, a second. I just want to make sure that I understand these are routine items. Are you making this motion for a routine item, Deborah?
Yes, that's fine.
And Jeff, that second?
Yeah, that's fine.
And Leslie.
I have a clarification I want to ask Roland about. The additional appropriation, if approved by the BET and the RTM, those funds come out of capital non-recurring. When the CDGB reimburses the town, do those funds go back into capital non-recurring?
We would not take this out of capital non-recurring. It would simply be a reduction of their fund balance.
Okay.
And that would come in as a revenue item and replenish the fund balance in the amount of the project.
Okay, it's not a significant amount, but maybe, so we'll just have to keep a footnote on the revenue that it includes this reimbursement of capital. Okay. I'm supportive.
So those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So Deborah? And me too. So that's 400. Larry, thank you again. Sorry you had to wait for so long. But we've approved this at, what?
I was going to say it was nostalgic listening.
Are you sure?
Anyway, approved as a routine item, and it goes on to the BET next Monday evening on their agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to move on to the health department and see who do we have from? We have Caroline Baisley who needs to be brought up, and I think Deborah Edwards And is that correct? I think that's what we have for this next item. So Jenny, could you please bring them up?
Hi.
Hi, Caroline. So I think that your microphone you need to unmute yourself maybe?
How's that?
That's perfect.
That's better?
That's wonderful.
Okay.
So is Deborah going to be coming too? Do we see her?
Yes, she's
Here.
we don't see her yet, but we hear her.
Yeah, I can't get the camera on for some reason.
Okay, well, you don't have to have the camera on. So we welcome you, back from the summer. I'm sure it's been a very busy one for both of you, addressing the ongoing COVID issues. But as usual, Caroline always seems to be here with good news, and her good news is that she has a Public Act grant that she wants approved and is presenting how she's going to spend that. So Caroline, you or Deborah, how do you want to handle this?
Hi. Good morning or good afternoon. This is the Public Act grant that we normally get. It's routine in nature in terms of coming to us. It's 8.5% reduction from last year. Each year goes down and down and down. This year, we were very specific in terms of what we would like approved, and we felt we normally approve, or we normally put in for a medical consultant to oversee our HIV, STD, and bloodborne pathogen program. We've always in the past have funded that through Public Act, which is a state grant. And so we would like that as well. And the professional medical consultant, it's for podiatry of those who are in need, get podiatry services. We also have had that on the list for many years as well. The temporary services, we do bring on a part-time billing specialist to bill for our services. And that position obviously is in there as well. We have repeatedly put that in for private insurance. In fact, this year the town, we just got approval for Anthem, which is the new insurance that the town has been given by the state plan. So we just got approval for that. So we're very thankful for that. Just in time for the flu clinic season. For a public promotion specialist, we have in the past put this position in there. I found that through the experience of COVID-19 pandemic, we are in desperate need for help in this area, getting the word out, doing news releases. I usually do it, and it's real burdensome. We had lost our public health promotion person in 2008 when we downsized the town's workforce. And, we've been struggling with it, but this time I really have felt the need to have someone in the media section with me, because I just couldn't keep up with what we had to do with the pandemic and what information I had to get out for the public. So we're going to bring somebody on, for 6 months would be temporary, and then we kick them back if we have money left in there for 14 hours a week, which would not meet any criteria for any kind of, benefits or anything like that with the town. So, and of course, the last one is the benefits. We do fund that as well. Everything that comes with the positions, the FICA and all of that, that always goes with any of the positions that we support through this grant. And that's it.
Thank you. I also noticed that Rob Corangelo has his hand up, and so I'm going to call on him and ask Jenny to please bring him up if we can here. Is that chairman of the board? Is that correct?
Yes. There he is.
There he is, but his microphone is muted. His
Yeah.
microphone is muted.
His microphone is muted. Well,
He needs to unmute his microphone.
oh,
Or if he's called in, he needs to unmute himself.
okay. Joanna. Can you get?
Yeah, sorry about that, Leslie.
No. Sorry that I didn't see
Oh,
your
there he is.
name originally, so I apologize if I missed it as you.
No, thank you for letting me join. Again, as Leslie said, I am the chairman of the Board of Health, and I just wanted to, to join, obviously to support Caroline and the department, and to reiterate, which I think all of you know, and I apologize, I missed the beginning of Caroline's remarks, but again, she and her team obviously have been doing an amazing job the past 6 months. You don't realize how long this is going on and what they've been able to do with what little they have. And it really is unfortunate that it is not a bigger team and there is no public health educator, but they have done an amazing job with what they have. And I just want to let all you know that.
Well, thank you. We're all very grateful for the work that Caroline does. And also she's just wonderful in terms of locating additional funds. And we certainly all appreciate both the hard work that she and Deborah and all the department members provide, and the team of volunteers, that have been tracking these, sadly, COVID ill patients or residents, et cetera. I bring this to questions and see if Jeff or Leslie or Deborah have any questions on this item. Jeff has none. Leslie, it looks like you do.
Yeah, I've had to find my unmute button. It's just a small thing because clearly the need that you justified in hiring the communication specialist makes a lot of sense. This money, as you pointed out, is slightly less than prior years. In the past, you've used it for your accreditation process. Can you, I know that I guess it's fair to assume, have you put that a little bit on hold given the focus on COVID, or is that still moving forward?
Yes, we did. We have put that on hold. We got approval to file our application in December. The Health HERR grant funded also this part of that effort last year. But my need for public health emergency, public health promotion person is, I'm so desperate for someone to assist us that whatever the other grant gives us, we will have to go with. In other words, we have 1 more year or 2 more years with that grant, which is the Health HERR grant that will fund that effort for FAB, which is the accreditation project.
And just to confirm, my question was not because I thought that you're misplacing your priorities. You're not. They should be on. They should be in the community.
It's on hold.
It's just I know that previous funds from this particular grant had gone.
Right.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, thank you.
So,
Deborah, I'm fine. I'm sorry, I lost my camera again, so I've been trying to get it back, but I'm fine.
Okay, I was just going to, so do we have a motion to approve? And,
I'll make a motion.
So Deborah's going to make.
I'll second.
And I heard Leslie before I saw Jeff's hand. So Deborah and Jeff, and this is routine, folks? Routine? Yes.
Yes.
I can't see Deborah shaking her head since we don't have a camera. So,
Said yes.
So yes, Deborah, Leslie, Jeff, and myself, Leslie. Okay, so that's a 400 routine. May I just ask one question before you leave, Caroline? Are you planning to do the regular flu clinics in any way or manner this fall, or is that you can't do those because of this kind of environment that we're in?
All right, the flu clinics will take place, but it will not be traditionally, you're right, because of the COVID-19, they will have to be done outside and inside. There will be a drive-through clinic that will be offered down at the Island Beach parking lot about mid-October. We're making provisions to do that as well now. And we will also be offering one for the seniors, although it doesn't have to be all for seniors. We're going to be using the Eastern Greenwich Civic Center. We're going to use the whole building in order to accommodate some seniors that need to sit down and get vaccinated as well. We didn't want to go outside because it just too rough on the feet. Some of the seniors can't mobilize into the back parking lot where we would put up a tent. So we managed to use the entire facility in order to achieve what we need to do while adhering to the sector rules and regulations and the executive orders that the governor has put out. So we're going to have a less amount of flu clinics this year due to the exposure issue of my staff and our volunteer medical staff. So we're going to have an extended day, if you will, for those kinds of the 2 clinics that I'm planning to offer. So we're going to go forward, but it's not going to be in a traditional way.
And
Thank you so
hopefully-
much, Caroline, and thank you for everything you do. So
Thank
I'm
you,
sorry,
Leslie.
Rob.
I was just going to add, and hopefully some of the outdoor flu clinics with the drive-through will be a good exercise for potential distribution of a COVID-19 vaccine. Again, thank you all for your support, and we appreciate your help.
So thank you, Rob,
Thank you.
Caroline, and
Thank you.
Deborah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move on here to the BOE. And so we need to, let's see who here, bring up Dr. Jones. We need to bring up Sean O'Keefe, and we need to bring up Russ Davidson. I don't think there's anyone else in the team. Have I brought up the correct team?
Did you bring up Sean O'Keefe?
I did say his name. I don't know if he's up yet, to be honest. I don't see him. Do I see him yet?
Yeah, I saw him. I saw him before, but I don't see him now. Oh, he's over.
Yeah.
Yes, I see him.
Yeah, he's over.
Yeah. His microphone is still muted, Sean.
John, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Yes, I just did.
Okay, great. So welcome, Tony and Sean and Ross. And, good to see you after a long summer, but we know that it's been particularly a long summer for Tony and Sean. And, we only hear good news and good things about the school opening. So, congratulations, guys. I know it's really difficult to work in today's kind of environment. And, thank you. That's all. So we're here to discuss the good news, the release of funds for the Cardinal Stadium. And, I think the good news is, and it's attached to the application, that you have approvals needed to proceed from the planning and zoning, and which includes both the site plan approvals and the municipal improvement approvals. And so I think Sean has very conveniently included the 2 conditions of release, and that was very helpful. I thank you. There are some conditions here, and I think one that we'd also like to hear about is the issue on where we stand on any private-public partnership funds availability. And also, full disclosure, wanted some clarification in terms of our fund release, all of which is coming from as I understand it, the 2019, the 2020 budget cycle and that approval. But then there seems to be some question about whether there's some duplication. We'll work that out afterwards. And the issue that I raised behind the scenes, and have talked, I think, with some of my colleagues here, is the fact that planning and zoning, and both in the municipal improvement and in their site plan approvals, approved a plan which they called 1A. I think we called ours the BET Phase 1, and ours may be inclusive of some aspects of this project that were not yet approved, such as the handicap parking and maybe part of the driveway and maybe the kiosk. So if you can just cover all of these issues as you want to as a team, that would be very constructive.
Let me start. Thank you very much, Leslie. As you would read in the MI and site plan approval letters, what was approved was Phase 1A, as you say, of the Cardinal Stadium bleachers to replace the home side bleachers and press box with elevator access, construct usable space under the bleachers to provide a home team room, public toilet rooms and support spaces, site improvements to include upgrading the access drive to the bleacher area for delivery, including food trucks, emergency access, an improved driveway from East Putnam Avenue that will eventually lead to a new parking area that contains new ADA parking spaces, and replacement of the lighting fixtures on the current poles located at Greenwich High School. So that's what's provided in the two approvals from P&Z. So what's included here in this full year 1920 condition, the language was the second of the 2.725, subject to release upon land use approval or approvals for portions of the project. So we do believe we have met those, given the P&Z letters. And I do agree that when these conditions were set, it was based on a Phase 1, Phase 2. So what I would commit to doing, and I respectfully request you release the 2.725, and you have our commitment that we would not expend any funds part of that 2.725 that applies to phases 1B and Phase 2.
So, I'm just going to ask a question ahead of my colleagues, and you're willing to send us a note to that effect so that we have it in writing in the file, just, for, process. I'm not asking you to change the numbers or to whatever, but if you could just put that into writing, that would be helpful, Sean.
Yes, be happy to do that.
Do we have any other comment, or Leslie? Does anyone have any questions? Deborah or Leslie or Jeff? I can't see Deborah.
I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so frustrated that you can't see me. But Leslie, you can go. I'm sorry that my camera just stopped working. I'm going to get a new one.
Okay, so I'll start with Leslie, and then because that's the way we started, and then I'll ask you, Deborah, and
That's
then
fine. Thank you.
So, thank you for the background. I have to ask, I don't understand the financial chart that was included in the documentation. It's hard to track, but I think where I'd like to end up is to know if you have dollar estimates for the completion, really for the construction and completion of the approved elements of the project. So typically what you're saying, Sean, I'm in agreement with. You're saying you've got approvals, you've met really the BET conditions for Phase 1A. And so you're asking for the construction money for Phase 1A as you've identified it. Do you have an estimate of the cost of Phase 1A at this point?
I would have to ask Russ to help us out with that one.
Yeah, hi, it's Russ Davidson, KG&D. Yes, we have an estimate. That's what was used when we originally, when the school board originally came to BET. So all of Phase 1 was 7.6 million. You split that up into two fiscal years. The portion we're asking, the board's asking for release now is for phase 1A, as well as professional services to continue with the approvals process for phase 1B and phase 2. So in order to build all of phase 1, we're going to need the remainder of the funds released. So
Does that cover all the construction costs for the 2725?
Depends on the construction economy. As you know, we have to publicly bid this. So we have not been able to go to bid because we didn't have funding released. So the bids will tell us, but we have been struggling a little bit with a lot of things through the approvals process that people wanted to add. So the board is going to be bidding a bunch of things that the Architectural Review Commission asked for as alternates, and we will let the bids decide if they can be afforded. We are keenly aware that there's a fixed budget, and it doesn't look like it's in jeopardy right now. The bleachers are exactly on budget. Those have been, we do have a proposal in hand for the bleachers. And that is obviously the biggest single item in phase 1, the home side bleachers. So yeah, we have estimates, but we don't have bids.
Okay. Can you just walk us through, since you submitted the document, the chart that's a little hard to read, but that's in the packet. There's yellow and blue, and there's
Yep, that's our cash flow schedule. It looks like it's been copied several times before it was distributed. But we were just asked to give our best guess at a monthly cost of professional fees and construction costs. So that's a projected cash flow based on a fall bidding of the project. And obviously, you'll see there that the amount you're approving should carry the project till the January, February timeframe. But of course, you can't commit any of that funding if you don't have it in hand. So what this is really going to permit the school board to do is to finalize the purchase of the bleachers so that the bleachers themselves can be fabricated. And until we come back to you for the release of the remainder of the funding, no other parts of the project are going to be able to go forward.
And this starts in March of 2020. Are these cash flows, are they actuals through August, or was this all a projection?
It's all projection. We have no bids, so we don't have a schedule of values or a construction schedule from a contractor yet.
So does March reflect the work that you're going to be doing in October, or has some of this work been done and not done of what's reflected on this chart?
The hard construction, nothing has happened because it's all projection.
Got it. And just clarification, not clarification, but the district can go to bid before the funds. You just can't sign the contract. Just for future timing, I don't want our release of funds to hold you up because the money's allocated.
I think we did know that. And just for a little background, phase 1 got split because of the difficulty in obtaining approval for storm drainage requirements and procuring testing in this time of COVID. So as you probably are hearing from everybody, the business world, the whole world is disrupted, and it was very difficult to get that storm drainage designed and the testing done. So in order to not delay the overall project, the school board decided to split phase 1 into 1A and 1B. We're hoping that phase 1B will get caught up to phase 1A. But if we don't get this funding released to get the bleachers under fabrication, which is a long factory fabrication process, it delays everything.
Is it, I don't have the estimates that you provided. I guess it was in the latest capital budget of the details of the total project, but do you have a sense of what you expect the 2.725 to cover? Is it bleachers and team room and lights and the site work for that? Or, basically the scope of 1A, or are you really just, your estimates don't let you give me an answer to that question.
Well, we do have an itemized estimate. I don't have it in front of me, but the splitting of phase one funding was not based on any scope of work. It was just how the project, the BET decided to break up phase one. So all in 2.7 is just going to be professional fees and purchasing the bleachers, which are about $900,000.
Okay. And just to clarify, to agree with what you said, when the BET approved the 2.725, the scope of work was different. The project was different than what it is today. I circulated the background that was provided by Sean's predecessor to develop that number, and it wasn't the same scope. The team rooms weren't anticipated to be under the bleachers. So more was known for the second appropriation that was made by the BET, the 3.6 in the current year's budget. You're not asking for those funds now. So my assumption was that what you're asking for will help you cover the scope of what's been approved. But you clearly don't have the firm answer on that because you haven't gone out to bid. So I don't know if it's close or not. I don't have a sense yet of what that 2.725 is going to cover.
Well, the 7.6 was updated based on the design for the building underneath the bleachers. So that 7.6 for phase one does reflect the current plan, but that budget was for construction in 2020. And now we're looking at a construction phase that'll be 2020 to 2021. I don't know if that means costs have gone up or because of COVID costs are gone down, but we're going to have to let the market tell us once we get to bid.
So Leslie, I think your questions are good questions.
Yeah. Okay.
Are you finished, or I was
I'm
going to?
finished for now. Yeah.
I was just going to ask. I'm going to go back and look at the documents that we used when we approved the budget back in April, because Leslie sent something, but it wasn't the same document. And I would just ask that Sean, if it's possible, because really this chart is so hard to read, if you could just get an original copy or one that wasn't copied so many times or whatever it is, and just resend it to all of us, it would be greatly appreciated. And then we'll look for the other one. And I think what we need is a little bit of clarification here, but we're, in spirit, I think we're headed in the right direction. Deborah, do you have any questions?
Okay, so my camera's back on.
I know, welcome back.
I just goes in and out. I'm sorry. I'm ordering one as soon as we get off this call. My one question was on the just getting some funding, GAF or anybody else, and kind of where you are on that. I know it's changed up a little bit, but do you anticipate getting any money for this? Thank you.
Right now, Joe Kelly, who is our representative on this committee for the Board of Education, is still working very closely, with GAF. And we don't know at this point in time. Obviously, with COVID, it stopped quite a bit of that. Our policy committee was also asked to look at, some naming rights to be able to place bricks and things of that nature. And they have not brought anything to the board at this point in time.
Okay. I would just hope that given that when we had this first conversation, I think it's 2+ years ago, the last budget, we always intended that there would be some money that would come and help. So I just hope that, when all is done, that we do end up getting some money. But so thank you.
Jeff, you?
Just one small thing. In Mr. Davidson's comments, I think if I heard him correctly, there was some reflection that some part of the 2.7 being released is for approvals that relate to the phase 1B and 2 and phase 2. And that's a little different than what Mr. O'Keefe had said. Looking at the flow chart, I see there is about $55,000 worth of approvals money. Some of that may relate to, probably does relate to phase 1A. I just want to be sure that we don't have an awkwardness later on that generously Mr. O'Keefe writes a letter committing that no dollars are going to be spent on phase 1B or 2, whereas in fact, Mr. Davidson may have it in mind that there is some approval work that needs to be done out of those dollars so that phase 1B will be able to move forward in an orderly way without delay. So I just wanted to be sure that I understood them both correctly and get them both onto the same page so that we, as they say, avoid any awkwardness later on.
So Jeff, I'm going to, before I have Sean respond, because, Joe Kelly isn't here and he was, I know Sean was at some of the meetings and Tony were at some of the meetings. I did like a couple of out of maybe 4. There was some confusion, in my opinion, from what P&Z was talking about, because, I would fully support any of those funds being directed to what I would consider to be phase 1B, which is the part of phase 1 that we as a BET approved, which goes beyond what was approved by P&Z and planning and zoning. But I certainly agree with you, Jeff, that, they've sort of wrapped in other things that weren't in our phase 1. So I would just ask Sean, in the spirit of what Jeff is saying, to differentiate and make sure that our phase 1 sort of fits with what was the intent of the approval in, February and April of this year for the Cardinal Stadium, the phase 1, basically the home side and not the visitor side. Is that fair, Jeff?
Yeah, I guess. I'm not sure I followed precisely what you were saying. If I heard Sean correctly, Sean was going to write a letter saying that none of the released dollars will be used for any portion of phase 1B or phase 2. And if I understood Mr. Davidson correctly, I believe he was saying that some dollars, I don't think it's a major amount, of the funds being released will be needed to pursue approvals for the phase 1B and phase 2. Am I quoting anybody correctly, or am I in a wrong place here?
No, I think you're good. When I said that we would not use any of these funds for 1B and 2, it would be activities that are dependent upon additional P&Z approvals. If you're looking for, if we do need to continue to spend money on the entire project approval process, and which Russ has been working the entire time. And I mean, we do still have remaining funds from the release of condition 1 that could easily be used for that activities.
So I want to step in here because I think it's a little bit confusing. And I think, again, I guess what I was talking about in terms of, Sean writing was really anything more for the parts of what we as the BET consider to be phase 1, which was not approved by the P&Z. When we start talking about phase 2, I think that is probably going to need a whole separate set of approvals, which I don't believe that we provided. So, I think that P&Z has sort of created, words that don't fit with our nomenclature, and phase 2 will need to have a totally separate MI from the Board of Selectmen, et cetera, et cetera. So that begins a whole new process. But I was referring to what I called, what we approved in April, which was phase 1, which is a much broader phase 1 than was what approved by P&Z. It's very, very confusing. We'll have to do a little bit of this offline. I mean, I'm certainly prepared to move ahead with this. I do think that, following up a little bit on the fundraising, I can tell you from what I've seen, and, I think Jeff and others on the board can say the same thing, Leslie, that our fundraising prior to putting a shovel in the ground is the best fundraising. It's very hard even to begin to collect, at least in this, public sector world, any kind of pledges or whatever after that shovel has gone into the ground. And we, the experience, I'm going to limit it to my own experience, but that included Nathaniel Witherall. It includes Misa. And I think it's, also the Byron Pool. So I encourage you to do whatever you can on this project in terms of fundraising, really immediately. And also, as you know, we did have lengthy discussions on the private-public partnership funds availability. But as I remember it, the spirit and the discussions were all around $1 million. We removed that as a condition. But in the spirit of it, I mean, I think the spirit remains, and that's the credibility, again, that's expected, because this is the way this has always been sort of initiated and discussed. So I just wanted to add those comments. Do we have any further discussion, or are we ready to move this towards
I just wanted
a
to add
subject to
add something about the phase 2 approvals process, because that had always been included in the phase 1 funding, because of the wetlands and storm drainage, we are not allowed, properly so by inland wetlands and planning and zoning, to view the storm drainage for one half of the site without solving the issues for what might be coming down the road. So the phase 2 approvals needs to continue in part to get the phase 1 approvals, because it's all the same site. So there will absolutely be no money spent on construction for phase 2 until it's funded. But the approvals needs to continue in parallel with the phase 1B, which has already been happening.
Okay, so Russ, I'm just going to stop you here. I think that what we need to do is go back and see what we approve. What inland wetlands may or may not want may or may not be what we approve. We just need to go back and check that,
Sure.
which we can do. And, we'll certainly be working with Tony and Sean on that. We want the project to proceed, but, inland wetlands cannot dictate what we have approved or haven't approved in the past. We just need to go back and check on it. Quite frankly, until you raise this point, I hadn't differentiated. Leslie, have you differentiated in that point?
I remember we had a long discussion about the funding, and we kept in the funding for phase 2, if I remember correctly, in that 3.6 million we approved. The 3.6 million is a little less than what the charts show from, I pulled up what Russ showed to the Board of Ed. I'm looking at it at my computer, which has 3.8 million requests, including that funding. So there was something small adjusted to it, but I can't recall what it is at the moment.
Yeah, Leslie, I remember that discussion, and it was 3.8 reduced to the 3.6 and change as it related. So we're talking about the 3.8 that was approved for this year, and there was a portion removed for a portion of the activities related to phase 2. But what we're talking about here is spending money in the second condition of what was approved in full year 20.
Right. So I think we're all, as far as I know, no one's questioning the release of conditions under 1920. So do I have a motion to release the conditions on?
I'll make a motion.
So Deborah's making a motion. Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second.
Yeah, Leslie.
Leslie's seconding. Okay, so Deborah and Leslie. And are we doing this as a routine item? Non-routine?
We could do routine because it's just a condition.
Yeah, it's just a release.
Yeah.
I guess actually, now that I've said that, we don't have that authority. We can recommend to the BET the release of conditions. So so Deborah, your motion is to recommend the release of condition?
Yes.
Okay. So
as a routine item.
As a routine item. Okay. And approvals, Leslie? Deborah?
Yes, I vote yes.
Okay, so that's unanimous 4-0-0. So I thank Sean and Tony and Russ for your help in attending today and for everything you've been doing. And this I particularly mean Tony and Sean. So I think, are we ready to move on to the next item, which is new business? And that will be discussion of economic conditions. And we have a lot of information that's come in terms of our economic conditions report. Roland, do you want to lead us in these efforts on this? There's quite a few different reports I think that I've asked. I thought everyone would be interested in after the summer break and after not only the traditional economic conditions, but our collection of our property taxes, our update on COVID expenditures, and our brief update on ISAIAS. Please excuse me if I haven't pronounced that correctly. So, Roland.
Okay, on the revenue piece, as you've been hearing, that the conveyance tax for the first 2 months is really doing well. On the other hand, the building permits are down, and interest rates, of course, are continue as they did at the end of last year. And we'll see if the conveyance continues or whether that's going to slow down.
So, I mean, these are really booming. These are certainly, well, certainly August is a record number, and June, it was a record number over the previous 47 months. So that's great. I mean, despite that, and just talking about the strong conveyance fee numbers, we do note that fiscal year 20 came in slightly under our budget. But this is great news in terms of revenues. Building permits last year were also lower than our budget. And it's good to watch this also because it portends what's going to happen to our grand list. So we're struggling a little bit here. I think
don't the two affect the grand list, both the conveyance? I don't know if you can assume there's certainly more sales, but if those sales dollars are higher than the assessed value, that affects the grand list, doesn't it?
It won't affect the grand list until they do the reval.
Right. And the reval has been put off by 1 year.
By 1 year. Okay.
So, I mean, but to Leslie's point, these sales are strong, and then they may benefit the reval. And you'll see when you get your report next Monday for the full BET and the assessor's report, that the value of the sales relative to our grand list numbers, again, 2015, were at about 7.5% above that level, which is the strongest we've seen since the 2015 grand list was done. But we'll see. You'll see that detail, in those charts. And so I think, Leslie, yes, to some extent, it could also benefit us, but we'll have to see.
I should know the answer to this question. Sorry that I don't, but is that a town decision that the grand list is not modified by purchase prices in the year of the sale, or is that governed by the state?
That's a state, and even building permits, Leslie, just so we, broadening the discussion ever so slightly, as funds or, building permits, they're all valued at the values established in 2015. So, that additional real estate is coming on, flat with 2015, not say at the 7.5% increase that we saw in the values in this past month, in sales values in the past month, if that makes sense. Roland, can you help us on the tipping fees? Is that just revenue coming in?
That's revenue. They billed about another $100,000 out, which we haven't received that yet. And it looks like the August is going to be about the same way. So it's very difficult to tell at this point until we get into a regular cycle here. But we're running a lag on the billings.
So a lag on the billings, and now I guess the program that was put in place, originally there was discussion about just automatically billing through, and now, as you point out, I think there's at least a 2-week lag, and of course then they take additional time. So it's probably running a month behind or something like that.
The $54,000 represents point of sale, where people paid with a credit card when they went tipping. There's another $100,000 that was sent out at the beginning of August, which won't be paid until September. So there's going to be a lag, and it's going to take us a while to get into a regular cycle to see how it's coming in.
Do the same resident permits go into this item too?
What was that, Jeff?
The $25, wasn't that the figure I think I paid for the permit for the resident to be able to live? Are they in that number too, or is that a line item?
I'll have to check on that. I think they are in there, but I'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, no, it's not important. I was just a curiosity question. Don't trouble yourself.
Deborah?
Yeah, so my question is, and I'm not expecting you to answer today, but maybe in a month or two, if you can do with this a sense versus what we were expecting in the budget. But I understand now we're just getting the program up and running. We've got the delay. So just think about how we can get a sense of, what we were expecting versus what we're getting once it gets a little normalized.
Okay. I mean, right now, what we're seeing, at least, is we're getting less tipping fee than we thought, but we also have less material to haul out. That's the way.
Some of that, and is some of that maybe because of COVID? Because I don't know. I mean, is it possible? So.
Okay.
Deborah, I think it's possible. I don't think they know yet. They also think it may be the fact that we put these tipping fees in place at $112, per ton or whatever, that perhaps they're going to lower cost areas. Before we had an advantage that didn't cost anything, and now, but on the other hand, the haulers for Greenwich are supposed to report into the DPW their total shipments. So, we'll see. Leslie, I think you had your hand up.
It was a small issue, so we'll go past it.
Okay, so I'm on the departments. Roland, do you want to sort of run through?
I also sent a second sheet out this morning that had the other departments.
Right.
And really what this is showing is we are spending at about the same as last year's level. The big differences at the Board of Education are really timing issues. We paid money earlier on special ed in particular this last year than we did this year, but we do have it encumbered. The one difference is the summer school. There was a permanent savings on that because the summer school program was limited due to COVID. So we did pick up some money there.
And what do you estimate that to be?
$800,000.
$800,000. Okay.
So just to be clear on that, so in the 21 budget, there's $800,000 of less spending related to the summer school?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
No, I mean, I'm sorry. I'm looking at your note at the bottom, and it says out of district tuition, $654,000.
Last year, we just paid it in August. We started to make payments in August, whereas right now, we only have that as payments, but we have over $3 million encumbered. So it's just a timing issue of when we're paying the invoices.
Is it a timing issue, or are we looking at a circumstance in which, in the face of COVID, there are out of district tuitions that in fact are not going to be incurred in the present climate?
I spoke to Sean about it, and he said that we would be paying those. It's just, in fact, if you looked at the same period last year, between what was spent and what was encumbered for that time period, that it's actually higher this year than it was last year.
I see. All right. So I was hoping that we get some break on this expense because of COVID, but we're not getting that break. Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the other big difference is the transfer to other funds. This year, we only are putting in a little over $4 million from the tax levy into the Z fund, the fund that's paid with taxes, whereas last year we had 8, and that's really accounts for most of the difference at this point.
So Roland, even though the bottom line of this says that there's about $10 million difference of lower spending this year than for the first 2 months, July and August, you're saying that pretty much this is tracking and those are just seasonal things?
Those tend to just be timing differences where we paid it last year in July and August, and this year we're not paying it until September. But right now it looks like we're going to be quite similar to last year.
Just to follow up, just so I understand, I thought you said that summer school is lower by 800,000, and that's probably a permanent.
That's a permanent one, yes.
Thing. That's permanent.
Yes.
Means that, so if summer school's 800,000 lower and we're running about the same as last year, we're actually higher in other areas. Is that right?
It could be, yes.
I mean, it's still early in the year. We don't know a lot. We shouldn't take away a lot, but
I guess to that point, Leslie, one of the questions I have, and I didn't know if it was appropriate for now, but maybe for next meeting, do they have a sense, because we've brought this up with the Board of Ed before and it wasn't appropriate with Cardinal Stadium, but a sense of, in this hybrid environment, what does their sort of run rate look like, and where are they spending more? What's COVID maybe potentially reimbursable versus what's just COVID town, versus where do we maybe have some savings? I think that might be helpful to get an idea of, and maybe they won't be completely have all the information for the next meeting, but that might be a good topic for our next meeting.
And should we sort of include that with the new business section, sort of a part of our economic conditions update, and just add BOE the way I think we've done before? I don't think we've necessarily held it out as a separate topic. Is that correct, Leslie? In this particular kind of case, we just sort of ask them if they'd join us. Roland, is that reasonable?
Yeah, like I said, we have not received any, we haven't incurred any regular payrolls yet for the Board of Education.
Oh.
The first payroll was September 4th, so we've seen nothing like that ran from Munis yet.
So I would ask, because one of the questions I had for HR, and we didn't have them come today, but just getting our arms around the teachers, how many more substitutes that they have than they planned. I think it would be helpful to understand their budget in this sort of hybrid environment. So I think for next meeting, I'm not asking for any of that information today.
I want to broaden that, or just build on that a little bit, because as we're coming to guidelines, which I noticed are not on the agenda today, but our reference book says that we need to pass them in October. So we do need to sharpen our pencils about the guidelines. But the same question really is true of all the departments, of really to understand what services they are and are not performing based on the budget that was passed, and how their business is impacted by COVID. And so I think whether it's a few special meetings between now and our next October scheduled meetings, but we should probably have, more informal, they're still public, but conversations with department heads about how they adjusted to the budget and how this current year is going.
So I would say, I think the information is important. I picked the Board of Ed because it's, such a large component, but I do agree it's relevant, but I don't know that I want a thing to have all the different departments come in. We all have, liaisons that stay in touch with different departments. And I'd like to figure out a way that we can do that without having special sessions. I mean, they're going to be working on budgets. We're going to be, having meetings with them a few months, which is really not going to be that long from now. So I wouldn't want to have special meetings. I think the information would be helpful in figuring out a way that we can get that information without special meetings.
I fully disagree. I'm sitting here pondering how I would try and approach guidelines. And I think the guidelines issue for us is uniquely difficult in this year. As we look forward to the fiscal year starting July 1, I don't think we have a clue as we sit here whether or not it's going to be a normal year because they will have found a vaccine in February, and by the end of April, everybody's running down and getting inoculated. By the 1st of June, we've already achieved herd immunity or whatnot, and so we're back to normalcy. If I knew that today, then I would know that I would be trying to write guidelines based upon normal, based upon probably something like what the budget committee approved this past spring. On the contrary, if I knew that we don't have a vaccine, that maybe we're even looking at a second round of burst of this infection like there was in 1918, that the second wave of it was way more serious than the first, with much greater virulence and much greater morbidity and mortality. So then we're looking at a rather deep COVID influenced budget. The budget that we created for the current year, don't mean this is any criticism of the majority who voted in favor of it, but the budget that was created for the current year, because there wasn't time or knowledge with which to do it, wasn't based upon what our expectations were of the departments, department by department, was going to need to spend in a COVID environment. On the contrary, it was based upon an expectation of $5.9 million of less revenue, and then simply curtailing the budget based upon prior year budgets, et cetera, to try and get back to the same 5.9 of reduction. And that didn't afford an opportunity to try and make a determination of exactly what will be the effect of COVID on Parks and recreational programs. What will be the effect upon the delivery of school services and the like. So if we're to write guidelines to the departments in a setting in which COVID is here, we need to know a font of information quite different from what the 4 of us have right now, what the 12 of us on the BET have. And I think we need to, in fact, talk to the departments to find out, okay, tell us what services you will not be running in the upcoming year if we're COVID influenced. What savings result from those? What exacerbation of your expenses are happening? So to pick schools as an example, since Deborah had picked schools, I mean, clearly we're not, if I don't have kids in school, we don't need to run buses. If I have kids in school on a cohort program, like we're doing in grade school and middle school or something, what cleaning do I need to do? What's the expense impacts of that? So respectfully, I think to write guidelines, I think we need to be talking about a range of things. It's not quite binary or whatever, but on the one hand, it could be normal. On the one hand, it could be deeply COVID. And I think we need to know a little something about what's happening at the departments to their budgets in a COVID environment. What programs are they not running? What dollars are they not spending? What additional dollars do they have to spend? And I would be asking to be setting up some brief but not non-existent conversations with each of the major departments.
So my point on that one though, Jeff, I'm sorry, Leslie, it's just, we don't want to have set up meetings for guidelines to then again, and it's almost like we are having a budget deliberation process to do guidelines. I think we can set up the guidelines in a way that are, I think we need to have a conversation about the approach to the guidelines and considering COVID. And I don't know that it needs to be that specific for each of the departments. Maybe we ask 2 or 3 questions and, when we figure out, or maybe it's 5, we ask each of the departments to provide those and we can consider it. But I don't want to have like mini budget deliberations in advance just to create guidelines, just then again to go and actually have the full budget deliberations a few months later. I think so. I'm in favor of meetings. I think that there's some information. We do like a CIP where we ask questions. Maybe there's 3 to 5 questions. We get those answers and we handle it that way. And if there's follow-up, we can ask. And maybe if there's a couple of the larger departments that we feel that it's important, maybe we do that. But I'm I don't think it makes sense, given everything going on, that we have to have kind of full meeting. I see Mike on now, so.
Yeah, I see him too. So, I think that, to Jeff's point, I mean, these are really excellent questions, and I think they're all unknowns. However, I think that they're probably so far also pretty much unknowns to many of these departments this year. They're scrambling to just deliver what they can do, to change their methodologies. And I do think, as Deborah said, there are many different things that we need to think about. In terms of flexibility also, I mean, we may be asking all departments to rebudget their budgets as we approach the hearings. Again, there's so many unknowns, whatever. And to Deborah's point, she wanted BOE. Maybe we pick out another department as a proxy for the town departments. We've got the BOE, pick out a proxy for the town departments, and have them come and discuss the similar questions to the BOE next month in the economic conditions. At least that would begin to create a template, and we can all talk about what town department that would be a proxy or something. I do think that there is, I thank you, Jeff, for recognizing that these are budget guidelines like we've never had before for any of us who've been on here, Mike or you or I or Deborah or Leslie. And so they're going to require a lot more flexibility. Mike, I think you're up. You would like to give us some input?
So we've all been working our way to a point of guidelines with all the same concerns. I think everybody's concerns are the same. I think the budget that we're sitting in right now was
So can I just stop you though? We're going to come to talk about guidelines just a little bit later. We're talking about economic conditions. If we can, if you could sort of keep it to this piece, because that's where Deborah started off. And then I'm going to come back under the chairman's comments and I'll call you first if you'd like.
Under chairman, though, there's no remarks. So we all knew we were going to get to this point. We're looking at obviously some burn rates. We're looking at revenues. We're looking at the things that we normally do to start guidelines. Nothing out of the norm. The question, when I'm hearing this conversation about meeting with departments, I think we should recognize that we have a first selectman who has to deliver a consolidated budget. I think we have the first selectman who has to give us your capital budget. I think the first selectman, and I think the Board of Ed has to deliver an operating budget. So I certainly think we shouldn't deviate from the process. The question in the guidelines there's really three simple questions that the three of you have, or four of you have to really contemplate. We've talked for more than a decade about finding a more efficient way to deliver our government and make that beneficial to the taxpayer. Okay, so that I don't think that's gone away in any of our druthers. You have to decide, we have to decide, are we expecting to return to the normal Greenwich, whether it's a year from now or 2 years, whatever it is, as Mr. Raymer said. That's the question. Otherwise, you're in guidelines. Are you going to be sitting here trying to pick and choose what services you would want to delete, enhance, modify, leave the same, whatever the question is. So I think that's the point. And then at the end of the day, it all comes back to what would you like to do? What's the objective with taxation rates going forward on the properties? That's really always the third question. I don't think anybody can argue that point. So we look at the revenues. For instance, here, you're not seeing Parks and Rec revenues. You're not seeing anything like, for instance, we know the golf course in its standalone fund, that's doing really well. But other than that, you're not seeing all the other revenues from the pages and pages of revenues we have. So you really need to do that next to see where that's going and to see where that trend is. October, we have our manual does call for guidelines in October. That could be obviously deviated from on our own choice. If we're waiting or looking for more information, we have the choice to do that. So I'm not so worried about that. But if I'm a department head and I'm coming to you and you ask me to talk to you about guidelines, what would you expect the reaction to be? So I leave it for that thought.
Well, I'll answer that. I mean, the question to the departments doesn't just have to be, gee, what do you think about we should be doing for guidelines? I mean, I would like to know, have a little more information over exactly what are the programs that at Parks and Rec, for example, which is entirely different than the situation with DPW. So I don't think we can take one department as being representative. To my mind, in a COVID environment, there were material programs at Parks and Rec that would probably not be delivered in the face of some severe second wave of infection across the winter and into the spring, matching like what we saw in 1918. Conversely, for the Department of Public Works, maybe I'm mistaken, but I'd be thinking that for the most part, the projects they're trying to execute, the dollar expenses that they're incurring, probably are not materially different. So I think these departments can be quite different from each other, and I think while I regretted at the time of the adoption of the budget that we didn't have real sense of what the departments were going to need at the moment that the majority was approving a budget, I don't think we need to repeat that mistake now. I don't think these need to be long sessions. I listened thoughtfully to what Deborah was saying. Maybe the possibility exists that we could ask some questions of each of the departments in writing or whatever, meaning informally, and then make a decision about whether we need to talk to departments or which departments we need to speak to. We can make that decision in light of information that we did or didn't get when we asked informal questions. Maybe we could handle it that way. Maybe at the end of the day, we don't actually need to meet with anybody. Maybe at the end of the day, we discover we need to meet with everybody. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. All I'm reacting to right now is we don't know if the upcoming year is normal or COVID. And if it's COVID, if I had to sit down and write budget guidelines today, I candidly am ignorant. I don't know enough. And yet I have departments that by that moment will have had slightly more than 6 months of experience of rendering their services and programs under COVID. I would like them to sit down and explain to me what, if anything, was the effect of COVID. What numbers are up, what numbers are down, what programs are gone, what programs are added. And with that, I could write a COVID set of guidelines.
I think, I'm going to make a comment here, Jeff. I think some of what you're saying is really almost instructions to Fred and Ben in terms of the department's operating plans. And as you know, I think the operating plans are due October 1. I think perhaps, are we saying that we'd like to create a couple sentences here and make sure as the departments produce their operating plans, because remember, the departments are very busy. They're trying to manage that they address these kinds of questions to give us a better, that kind of takes what Deborah is saying and then also takes a process that's in place and seeing if we can, and we have to move, pretty nimbly here because as they're, Pete can confirm here, they're busy putting these plans together. But I think that might be a way of sort of, again, taking what you're saying, taking what Deborah's saying and put it into an existing process.
Good point to you. I mean, I hadn't thought about that we could have operating plans at our disposal. By the way, I think they have the same amusing problem. If they're going to file by October 1st an operating plan, are they gazing at their crystal ball as to whether or not they're going to have COVID for the next year or not? But listen, by all means, I think you're absolutely right. I would love to be looking at the operating plans. That would be very informative to me. They'll probably end up writing each of them 2 operating plans, one under COVID and one without. To Mike's point, where he was saying, well, gee, the town administrator and the first selectman will be putting together budgets. Yes, but if you take a look at the charter, all of that was supposed to be done in the light of guidelines that we have a responsibility to write. And so the sequence of things, that good work by the first selectman and by Ben is going to need to have before it the guidelines, or we won't have met our obligations under the charter. We have in years past at times passed guidelines in November. I don't think we ever did them in December, but we certainly didn't always do them in October. But whether we're accomplishing this in October or November, I think there's a time pressure. I think we need to take steps now to set up a process, a protocol, whatever you like, to how we're going to gather the information that we think we need to be able to write guidelines, particularly the COVID guidelines, in an informed way. If I knew now that there wasn't going to be any COVID, I think then we're writing guidelines that for a normal year in a normal way, and I'm comfortable doing that. And I think we have the material at our hand. It's the COVID influence that I just don't understand.
I want to, can I just add something to reinforce that? The Board of Ed we're putting the superintendent at a real disadvantage too by waiting till November for guidelines. They're presenting their budget publicly per their calendar on November 6th, which is even before the BET meets in November. If what happens is they've got to follow a process, there's a very public budget, there's a lot of debate over it, they need to approve it by the end of December. So that what will happen is the superintendent will present a budget based on no input from the BET. So she puts forward a budget with whatever assumptions she believes are reasonable. Then what happens if the BET's guidelines are we need a lower number from them if you're managing to a mill rate, which it's hard to avoid not understanding the impact of all of these budgets on the mill rate. Then it's taken out of the superintendent's hands to a lot of degree and put into board members and public's hands. And it gets to be a very messy process if she cannot incorporate some of the fiscal thinking that we might have into what she presents publicly.
So, I would hope that this year, as a first, maybe that the BOE would also do an operating plan, since they're more than half of the budget. But what if I suggested that Deborah and Jeff put together 2 or 3 questions, since I think, you both worked on it very well, and then, send it out to Leslie and me. I know it's behind the scenes, but trying to set, and, see if we can come to agreement over the next couple of days or whatever you think is a reasonable time frame. Obviously let the other BET members know what these questions are after the fact, but I'll send them, I can alert Ben, send them to Ben immediately, whenever they're ready, and say, these are based on where we are looking at guidelines, the unknowns, this is what we would like to see. And, I guess we can send it to Ben and make sure that the BOE also returns an operating plan the way the charter says, but we also can send it directly to Tony and Sean and say, this is what we're asking in our operating guidelines. So is that a plan that we could move ahead and begins to address some of the issues that Leslie is talking about and, helps us?
Great.
Yeah,
point.
I was just going to say, I just think that in the Board of Ed, if they're not going to give a full operational plan, at a minimum, they're going to answer these questions, because I think that it'll be important. And yeah, to work with Jeff, I think it'll take just a few minutes. We can put together the questions. And I like the of getting it into the operating plan. I think to the point with Leslie Moriarty about, the timing in the Board of Ed. I mean, and Jeff, I think we're in a COVID environment. We're in a COVID environment for the next year, but what does that mean? And does a vaccine and when that happens? So there is going to be some COVID overhang in the next year. And so I don't know, just personally, I don't see how. Also, we're going to have to just take a best approach towards considering different variations of the world look like in the 21-22 year. So I don't know that in the past years where we've been so specific, maybe this year we need to be a little bit more general, just given the uncertainty. I don't know. I don't know where we haven't seen guidelines. We haven't worked on them yet. So, but I think we need to be a little bit more flexible, ability to react a little. So, maybe we had some sense, but I certainly don't. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we about a general where we think we're going at a high level to give these departments a sense. But I think we have to assume that there's some level of COVID that we're operating under, and how much your guess is as good as mine.
Okay, so let's just say we've talked about a brief framework on this part. We'll return to budget guidelines in just a couple of minutes, talk about it a little bit more. And Roland, should we, if you don't mind, and then we're going to rely on Deborah and Jeff to help us out, move this ahead, and we'll get this ASAP to, well, certainly to Ben and also to Tony and Sean, and say that this is, you know, what we're looking for when the guide. And I think one of the other things we can say is, I know there's a lag between the operating plans and when we normally get them, but we may just ask Ben if he can send a draft version to, you know, budget committee, BET members before they're finalized. At least it would help everyone to, again, this period that we're dealing with, whether we're Roland or Pete or any of us, so or the departments. Should we just continue through the reports? Roland, a lot of information is here. Do you want
the one that's I sent something out about the tax collections for July and August this year compared to July and August last year.
Right.
And we are running about, as a percentage of budget, about 10% below last year. Now the deferment or whatever of paying the taxes runs out at the end of September as it stands right now. So when we look at this next month, we should see if we're caught up to last year or people are still not paying their taxes.
Yeah, I mean, I think the figure right now is worthless. I mean, maybe then to have compared it to where were we a year ago at the end of May or something, how many people were paying their taxes before the due date?
Yeah.
You have a different due date. So you need to let that due date come and go, and then we'll match up and see how we're doing.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I don't mean that in a rude way when I say worthless. I mean, no, thank you for giving us the figures. I just don't think it's meaningful quite yet.
But it does show that, you know, we were somewhat concerned about would a lot of people take advantage of the deferment date, and not that many did.
Yeah, I think it shows that, you know, that in terms of the personal, the residential property, that probably a lot of them are coming in under their mortgage programs. As Roland pointed out, I mean, I think there's more like would we have to borrow and these kind of things. I mean, this just confirms this. I mean, I knew fully that, you know, we still have, you know, another couple of weeks plus before they were due, but it gives us a handle on what is happening, and maybe even a heads up, since Roland pointed out we're 10% below collections. Remember, we budgeted our collection rate at exactly the same as we have in every other year. And Stanford was about the same collection rate in past years, but this go around, Stanford budgeted a, you know, like 95% collection rate, down about 5%. We did not. So I just think it's, you know, thank you for doing this, Roland, appreciate it. I think we also have a report on COVID spending, Roland.
Yeah, the other thing that was sent out was the amount of COVID spending by the departments. There's two columns. One is for the last fiscal year, and the other one is the spending from July 1 through September 15th this morning. The Board of Ed, obviously, this fiscal year is far and away the biggest one, which we're hearing that those monies are reimbursable, or we hope they are. The other one that's not shown here, Nathaniel Witherall, most of their monies are in the form of salaries, and I wasn't able to tell how much of their salaries they're saying is COVID related. We have received through the CARES Act last year, 1920, about $1.1 million, and this year through August, about $700,000 at the Nathaniel Witherall.
So just a heads up, there's a lot of dialogue in the aftermath on COVID, particularly the mortality that happened at nursing homes. A lot of focus on the fact that nursing homes run themselves in large measure by the use of nurses' aides that are permanent part-time and work at more than one facility. And they're tracing the fact that the nurses' aides moving from facility to facility was one of the important vectors of infection. It wasn't so much the visitors of family members and other things. It was the transience of the aides. And they're thinking that there needs to be some process, protocol established where there's that's controlled, perhaps by limiting the ability of aides to work at more than one facility. I don't know how the nursing home model that we're using generally, meaning statewide, would work with such a constraint. But surely it's important that we recognize that Nathaniel Witherell has exactly that syndrome. I'm not saying that we had a lot of infection through them. I don't know any such thing. But certainly our nurses' aides work at 2 and 3 facilities and move among them. And we may be facing some significant change in the model that we're allowed to maintain in light of the experience with COVID. There may be some changes there.
So I'm going to add a couple of things here. We did receive I'm going to speak as, I don't normally do this, but Andy sent a report out after the withdrawal meeting last night. I don't know if he sent it to everyone or just, whatever. But he indicated, what?
I don't think I saw it.
Well, anyway, the point of the report indicated that they have been doing substantial testing at. I mean, it was their monthly meeting, board meeting, but that they've been doing substantial testing at Witherell. I guess there hasn't been any COVID amongst any of its residents for a month, and that they have all staff on a every week testing, and or I guess a quarter of them every week. And there has also been 0 COVID amongst our staff. And so that was all very good news. So I'm just sharing that. I do also think, Jeff, that you may be right about some of these nurses' aides may work in other nursing homes, but I think just because of the convenience of it and the fact that we offer benefits, a great benefit package, maybe the hospital doesn't, but maybe they offer better wages and so forth. There's an awful lot of back and forth between the staff at Witherell and Greenwich Hospital. So, whether what you're talking about is applicable here, I honestly don't know. And then, maybe that's another topic that we need to consider for Witherell alone. Just a question to Larry or whatever, or, for the February hearings. So, but I did want to report that the news seemed to be very good coming out of Witherell. And, thank you to Larry as chairman of the board and all the, the board itself and all the staff that they seem to, be working and on top of it. So, but a good point that you raised. I guess we had also had a report from
Leslie, excuse me. Sorry, before we move off this COVID chart, I just want to ask Roland the question, just to make sure I understood. The state grants for reimbursement of COVID expenses expired, is that correct?
That I don't know. I know that. Oh, do you mean to put the money into to request a reimbursement?
Correct. Was that
I don't know if that's
period, or I just can't recall.
I don't know, but I know in speaking to Sean that he was saying that he expects, like for example, the ones in this fiscal year to be reimbursable. So that would have to be beyond the deadline then.
Okay, and is the filing for all of that goes through our risk manager?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe we can ask her to give us
I'll talk to Megan about an update on the reimbursements.
On reimbursement. Thank
you. I asked that we get that too. So we'll get that. And then also Megan had put together a report on Isaias. I always worry about pronouncing that name. Roland, I think she presented us a written report.
She did.
And I think she's optimistic that we will get some reimbursements, both from the insurance side and the FEMA side. And that fortunately for the town, we had, I'll say, minimal kind of issues. And a lot of it was in landscaping and trees and so forth. And our insurance policy does cover some of that expense. It just depends on how much, I guess, occurred, but she's on top of that too, as we would expect our wonderful staff to be on top of, right? So do we have any other comments on that, Roland? Or are we moving off of, oh, let me just also add economic conditions, just because I normally say this. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, basically the inflation rate for our area, the CPI is down from when I last reported it in July, and it's now down to 1.4% annual increase. I believe the last time I reported it, the number was actually coming out that afternoon, so it was a little bit shaky. But I think the number came in at something like at 1.7%, and now it's down to 1.4%. So anyway, okay, so I think we've covered that section. I did have a section that I said were my comments. So what I did want to comment about was a little bit about the budget guidelines. I want to go back to that. I see Mike is still there. Looking at the budget guidelines, yes, I think that Roland, many people have been, asked for input, whoever, Leslie, anyone, Deborah, Ian, Mike, et cetera, departments, et cetera. And, but we're putting together, and I agree with Jeff in terms of the COVID, but we're also putting together these budget guidelines in an environment where our governor has recently announced a proposed 10% cut in the Connecticut state budget. We don't know how that will impact our southern Fairfield County area. We certainly don't budget grants and so forth, but we have some large numbers within his budget, and we don't know what will happen. At one point, there was some risk in the teachers' pension fund, and perhaps picking up some piece of it, normal costs or whatever. But when we look at the CAFR for that number, last year the number was about $35 million. This year, going into the CAFR, that number will be increased to $50 million, just barely under it. And that reflects a reduction in that pension fund down to a 6.9% discount rate or rate of return. I think we're also talking about these budget guidelines when the Federal Reserve Bank's announcement to focus on employment rather than inflation. But as I just in the earlier section mentioned, that the inflation rate in our area has actually decreased. We're also looking at this budget as we have in past years, operating off of the previous year's budget. But, to be very honest, while we rapidly approved that budget, we did it in an environment where we had not budgeted for or even understood the COVID environment, which Jeff has just raised in an earlier section. I think that there are many residents who have suffered job, whatever we want to call them, deferrals, losses, or, either reduced compensation already, or perhaps they'll feel that more in budget time. I think another not interesting, but maybe kind of sad, was a couple times, I think in the Greenwich Times, the report that 29% of the town's residents are within the ALICE income parameters. And I'm always very nervous if someone asks me what does ALICE stand for. So does anyone want to say what ALICE stands for?
Asset limit. Yeah. Income constraint,
but employed.
Okay, well, thank you for the help. But, I think, again, when you're saying 29% of the residents, that isn't just, and I have to be, there's a new name for the Greenwich Housing Authority. But when you're talking about 29%, around it, 30% of the number is greater than 60,000, that's 18,000 or more residents. So, I think that that's something else we have to think about. And then, and then, I'm going to come back to Jeff again, Deborah, whoever. There is certainty that at some point the town will return to a new normal from this COVID-19 period, but I don't think, that any of us know when that is. And there's certainly uncertainty as to when and how that will occur. So I just wanted to get those things out on the table. I think, the other thing I'd like to get out on the table are the without really talking about, rates or whatever, but just the basic fixed charges, expenses that we're up against in this particular budget. So Roland, can you just, without going through what's, flat or 2%, I think Roland always starts the budget out at 2%, but can you go through some of the fixed charges, maybe put that up, and we'll talk through just a few of those expenses so the people, so the budget committee and those watching really understand that. I think Dan did a great job at last week's, Dan Ozesmere, last week's budget overview committee in terms of doing it. But I think, Roland has the details and perhaps you could put up that screen. Is that possible, Roland?
I think so, yeah.
Otherwise, I'm sorry?
Yeah.
And you might as well just do it, your 2%, which always is a good start. We haven't changed those numbers. We could do it flat, whichever, 0. Maybe that's a better number to use, 0.
Well, here's the 2%.
But the bottom line is, no matter what scenario is used, let's look at fixed charges and where we are, and particularly go through that.
Well, the big ones obviously are healthcare, which if we assume another 10%, and the pension contribution, which is.
But let's explain why 10% is, because even the 10% is working off, remember, it's working off last year as the base, but we got an increase in July that we hadn't been expecting. Roland, why don't you go through a little bit of that, just another 30 seconds on the details of that.
Well, when we put the budget together, we were told that the rates would be flat for 1 quarter, and they are flat for 1 quarter, but they then tacked on the savings from that 1 quarter and added it to the increase starting on October 1st. So we didn't adjust the budget at that point because it already passed. So that was about $900,000 that's in that we'll be paying over the next 9 months that we didn't anticipate.
Right. So when we add that 900,000 to the budgeted healthcare, then the 10% is really maybe 8%. So we have that in our thing.
Hey, say that again.
Jeff, I can't see you. I think it was Jeff.
Yeah, it was me, yeah.
The healthcare costs, when we look at the 52,548, you can add another, $900,000 to that base number, because remember, we hadn't budgeted, but we knew it was coming, and or we were told at the last minute it was coming. So that number you can add, it's really whatever that is, 448 or something thereabouts. So when you take the number that Roland here, it isn't truly at 10%. The number is more like 8% because the base is just a bit higher than what we're showing. Because again, we're budgeting off of last year's approved budget, not what ended up being our costs.
And the other thing that's a variable on healthcare is, if you remember 2 years ago, the states said they were going to give us, make Fairfield County pay a premium because our experience was much higher than the rest of the state. And it was going to be a 4% increase over what the average rate across the state is. So we were supposed to get 2% 1 year and another 2% this year. But last year, or for this fiscal year, the 2021, they gave us a 3.5% increase. So now the premium is 5.5%, and we don't know if they're going to do something like that going forward.
So I think so you know, when you look at these numbers, the point of this is saying, gee, you know, that 10% isn't really 10% because of this change base. And, you know, there's probably not much flexibility in there. OPEB, I think, Roland, do you want to just, you know, that's.
We just left it pretty much the same. I don't know what that number is going to be. The actuary is just starting to work on that valuation. And the pension contribution, this is something that the actuary gave us a few weeks ago, which could be something $31 million. We don't know yet. We should have a better idea by the end of next month, I believe.
So yeah, by the end of next month. So this is, you know, again, an unknown that we'll walk. And, you know, I'd like to just add here that this was done, Roland, when did we originally do this? 6 weeks ago or something?
Yeah.
You know, this was probably pre the pension fund, not the last one, but maybe I lose track of time, second to one, when the Greg Stump came to the meeting. But the number that Greg Stump is using is 31.8. And that includes sort of the 1 year experience study, the fact that we haven't, the performance. It also includes the 5-year experience study, which is what Roland is talking about, is going to be coming. It was originally to come in August. We're now hearing it's coming in October. That's something we do every 5 years, and we should do. And then the third thing is the reflection of the discount rate reduction by the 0.25%. That is, you know, the question is, do we have to do that? It's over, you know, $2.5 million. It's off cycle. It isn't necessarily something that the rating agencies are talking about. You know, I've asked for additional benchmarking information, and hopefully by our October meeting, we'll have that, and maybe even Greg Stump going through that with us. I think that's critical. You know, do we have to do some of these things? And then the next is the risk fund.
Yeah, the risk fund, we're leaving that, at least here, we're leaving that flat. You know, even though we haven't had any of the big cases come through and had to settle them, you know, our insurance policies have a $3 million deductible. So as of this point, we'll leave it in there. The next one is Nathaniel Witherall, which looks like it's better, going from 5.6 to 3 million. But in reality, it's $1.5 million worse than last year because we funded $4.1 million out of fund balance last year. So that's a hit right there. And the next one is school lunch. We know that they lost about almost $900,000 last year due to COVID, and we have to start replenishing that fund balance. So that's where we are with the fixed charges.
Yeah, and the other thing I think we haven't mentioned here because it gets lumped in is that our basic insurance policies went up, and I think we approved some of that sort of again after the budget cycle. So you know, that is also a risk. You know, in terms of looking ahead, you know, how do we compute the capital tax levy? You know, if we don't do as many projects, do we have to continue to increase it or at the same level? I think this has basically got a couple $1 million there rather than maybe historic 3. Do we need to do that? If things are changing or the environment, I guess I haven't looked at the capital numbers. Maybe Deborah has in the last, we'll call it, I don't know, not quite a month, but there was about $134 million of capital projects that were either available or encumbered. Quite frankly, $134 million sounds huge to me, especially with no major projects like we had at one point with New Lebanon. But to be very honest, I've never looked at these numbers in August. To be honest, in the past, I was always on vacation. And so I have no interest, and, you know, I might look at the fiscal year. Hard, Pete, everyone, you know, if there are ways we can save money and still do the right thing for the town, like deferring the reduction of the discount rate on the pension fund by 1 year. That probably would be a good idea, and still our pension fund would be
That's
conservative relative to other
the choice
municipal.
of the retirement board, not us.
That's true, Jeff. But I think in the past, we have also been influential, and, you know, as I think, you know, I said in the meeting, it's a zero-sum game. You know, I mean, we always pay those sums. It's not necessary from the rating agencies. And, you know, I think it's disappointing that Pete Minarski voted one way on a couple of the votes, and that he didn't even have the town employees following or supporting him. So, you know, we'll see. I agree. But maybe other people that are more influential than me can talk with, you know, the pension board members. Again, we have always funded all pension funds. Our current rate is still very conservative relative to other municipalities. It's not a rating agency issue or anything else for us. And where I will say is it's unusual. Well, it's not unusual, but this is the 5th year. We've got an experience study coming up. I believe this board always is inclusive of the or the retirement board of that experience study. So if you could do the experience study this year and the rate reduction next year, that might just be a good teamwork thing to do. But you're right. You're 100% right. 100% right.
Leslie,
So
can
anyway,
I have a child pickup very soon. So I just if you want to do the minutes, I want to make sure that
I was just gonna ask Roland to reduce the screen to, you know, the
Leslie, I'd like to make a couple of comments on guidelines and these numbers and how to approach them. We can, if Deborah needs to go, we can continue the meeting after she leaves, and I can say what I need to say. But, you know, you paint a very bleak picture, but you also cherry pick all the negatives. Look, the challenge is really difficult. I don't disagree with that. I disagree with some of the assumptions there, but the other side of the equation, and the thing we always have to talk about, is what services our town residents want, and it's the balancing act. You know, by deferring pension contributions, the argument's made that we're keeping taxes artificially low in an annual basis, and we have a bigger payout going forward. And so, you know, if we continue to try to do that with every aspect of our budget, it catches up to us. Funding our departments at lower than wage increases year after year after year after year has created an issue where there are fewer savings for them to do. So the real hard work has to be, what services do we provide that we shouldn't be providing going forward? Our schools, you know, big number on paper. It's easy to say, oh, let them reduce $5 million, shouldn't be a problem, $3 million, whatever that number is. And we saw the problems that they had before. What Sean O'Keefe reported to his board, that of the reductions that they made in the fiscal 21 budget to try to get there, only 577,000 of it are permanent savings. The rest, they just took the hit either by using excess available funds from prior year's budget, which didn't roll over, or deferring things going forward. And we talk about problems and challenging. I don't want to just pick on the Board of Ed and special education, but we talk about challenges in waste management at DPW and that issue, and the investments we may need to make in some of our big projects going forward in stormwater management. And so, you know, the answer is finding that balance. I disagree with you on the inflation rate you use. It's weighted, came down because food expenses went down, but the town budget doesn't have a lot of food expenses. We have more labor and employee costs, which is one of the higher components of that. So
I thought it was energy. I want to stop you. I believe it was energy.
Let me finish, please. There's a conversation to be had, and it's important to be had on what it is we really need to deliver. The budget committee approved a budget last year that was $5 million higher than the starting point this year. That was a 4-0 vote. We all agreed that that was the budget moving forward, and it had a capital budget significantly higher than we approved. You can't just walk away from that level of service and that level of commitment moving forward and saying, okay, we're going to erase the slate and start over again. I think that there's, you know, the trade-offs or the obligations that we have to the residents require us to have that conversation. And, looking at this chart, you're managing to a financial number, but there's a lot behind that financial number.
I think, again, I was trying to lay out the parameters against which we also are operating against, and the numbers that Roland is putting together, as we have realistically done every single budget, Leslie, whether it was last year or the year before. These are the kind of things we're up against. I also laid out, and the inflation rate, yes. It was, I think, energy. And so that should be a good sign, because in one of the Roland has utilities at 2%. That should help us on that budget, and we can lower the utility costs. I didn't bring those up. I only had Roland talked about fixed charges. So yes, you're right on some of these things, but we also have to be realistic about the environment. I agree with you on the services that people want. And quite frankly, that may be reduced too. Their lives have changed. All of our lives have changed. And, that I do also come back to the point that hopefully people will be realistic in putting together operating plans. And in your comment on that, I think as Deborah and Jeff put together the 2 or 3 questions, they should just think, just make sure they're putting in perspective in terms of the services that they hear that the residents want, because those may change. There seem to be a lot of people on the golf course these days, but guess what? The great thing about the golf course is, and I love this, it's a revenue fund. So when I looked, one of the first proxies that I looked at when I started looking at the budget was the Griff Golf Course Revenue Fund for this past year. And yes, the revenues were down substantially, but so were the expenses. And they're very measured in terms of the capital, and they understand the issues. So they returned to their own fund balance. Something. So anyway, I know Deborah is also
I want to just say one thing quick. I've literally I've got 3 minutes. I have to go get in the car.
Okay.
I'm sorry. But Leslie Moriarty, just on your one point about, we approved a budget that was $5 million different. We have to all acknowledge that when the budget and then when the final budget, the world changed dramatically, and none of us were expecting what happened. When COVID hit, I call it the social isolation, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, so things did change from when we approved. One thing that I was just thinking when Roland was speaking, school fund, incremental money, is there any argument, because a lot of that was delivering food to kids that were not in school? Could it be viewed as COVID related, and could any of those incremental costs, because we're not operating, could that potentially be reimbursable as a COVID? I'm not sure. I was just thinking about what it is that we were doing, the cost incurred, and is that possible? We should look into that. I think we should give ourselves time we have to have these conversations. I know we're trying to set up, and we're kind of posturing a little bit about budget guidelines and where we go next year. But I am to pick up my child from school. So if you want to approve, if you want to pick minutes, I'm happy to approve the minutes.
Okay, so do you want to, if that's all right with the others, if we do a quick approval of the minutes, and I know Mike wanted to speak again. So, can we move to the minutes and then just revert back here? Is that okay with you guys?
Let's do that.
Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
A second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that's 400. Okay, so Deborah, thank you very much. And hopefully we won't continue much longer. I will certainly be happy to brief you.
That's what Jeff and I'll call you, and we'll go through our questions, okay?
Yeah. We're going to talk about you after you've gone.
Yeah,
No,
well,
come on,
it's going to be recorded, so I get to hear exactly what you say.
And they do their own transcript. Okay, Mike.
Okay, bye-bye.
Mike,
Bye.
do you have some things to say here?
Just real quick. I want to make sure the budget committee is targeting guidelines to be to the BET, and so the BET can approve them in the month of October. I just want to make sure we're clear on that. And I've heard a lot of comments today about the majority BET, and I've heard a lot of other comments. Let's put the facts in front of us just so we're all clear here, because if we don't stop and really put our finger on what we need to do here, we're going to run into problems. So let me just take away so I understand it, and you just check my math for me, because from time to time I get asked. So healthcare is up 4.5.
Mike, we're getting a lot of background noise, or at least I am on you.
Not for me.
It's me.
Everybody,
It's me. I'll go.
Okay, just help me out here. So healthcare is up that 10%, which Roland's got 4.5 mil. We got that other 900 we got to plug in there somewhere for the healthcare. We got a pension increase of 5 million that we know of right now. It might be more, it might be less, but we know it's 5. We've got a normal budget roll up on the top of that chart at 2%, which I'll call that 6 million, right? We got Nathaniel Witherell. I believe we got to backfill fiscal 19. That's 3 million. Right, so that subtotals 19.5. What we don't know is capital tax levy, school lunch fund, insurance policy, and there's a pretty good list there. So as we move forward, and we're going to try and make our deadlines, I would say that this 19.5 is higher. At this point in time, I've seen it as high as 12, but I've never seen it at 19.5. And I'm not bringing in revenues because you're really not bringing that in here. And Roland has it at the bottom. I just want to verify this, because I think I think the challenge before us is going to take less rhetoric and lots of planning and deciding on how we go. And I think we start having, as we look at the capital model, we have to start thinking about, the impact of more than just 1 year. I think just keeping all things even. I think we need to go into this, and there's a lot of work here to do this. This is an incredible, Roland has the number on the bottom, if I could read it, of 8 to get to a zero, something like 18 or 19 million dollars. So that's, I must be pretty close in my calculations. So I just wanted to get us on that page, and I encourage, as you,
what's wrong here is the whole top section of your budget has taken this special coronavirus and deemed it to be the corona budget, and deemed it to be a normal budget, and to move from there with a 2% increase. I mean, that whole budget was structured in a concept of looking at a list of capital items. I don't know, $2.5 million of which was deemed to be a shortfall from conveyance taxes, interest, and building permits. $1.7 million was deemed to be, we won't receive a penny of money from the state or federal government. And when you got all done doing that math, and then you went to a series of items that were sort of Parks and Rec related, Camp Carefree, user fees on fields. I'm trying to remember what the other items were. They got all done. You decided that there was going to be a $5.9 million roughly shortfall in revenues. And you restructured the budget from the prior year so that you could create a savings there that matched roughly the same $5.9 million. And now that, for what you've done here for this math, is you've deemed that's an accurate budget for us to be working in a non-COVID normal year, and we'll just have those items go up by 2%. I'm not sure any of those predicates are rational or at least acceptable to me. I think if you're talking about a budget in a COVID year, we need to understand what that is. If you're talking about a budget in a normal year, I don't think this COVID budget is the budget for a normal year, unless you're planning that going forward, there will be no school busing. Going forward, there will be no summer school. I mean, going forward, there will be no Camp Carefree. There will be highly diminished sale of beach passes, et cetera. I mean, I'm not sure any of those factual assumptions are going to be appropriate assumptions. Jim Lash said it at one point, I think, very well. And his view of it is, I would like the budget to include the services and programs that would make this a community in which I would like to live in it. And I think that's not a bad standard, and that's not the standard that's being applied here.
Okay, so let me just finish. First of all, I'll finish. If you wanted to restore that budget to the other budget, it would be $5.8 million. And being that the majority was only off of the minority by $1.5 million, you haven't fixed the problem that you've even subscribed to, because your budget was still a $1.5 million reduction on the schools. So with that said, we can continue on that conversation, or we can continue on a conversation of, if you want to take this budget and you want to restore it because you say the revenues came back, that's fine. So the only difference is $5.8 million between that and the other.
The budget that the minority was apart from the majority on was a question of, at what figure do we accommodate ourselves to the COVID distress? And I readily agree with you that if I know that the fiscal year 22 budget is going to be operation under COVID distress, that number appropriately is going to be a number dramatically different from the number that it would be if I had a budget for the fiscal year 22 that was not under COVID. And none of us know the reality of what's going to happen. What troubles me, stay with me one more moment. What troubles me is that although all of us can make a pretty good guess about what would we like to be supporting in a non-COVID year, I don't think any of us have the knowledge at this point to know what's an appropriate budget in a COVID year. I have due regard for the fact that the voting majority came up with a budget for the upcoming year under moments in which we were running out of time and had limited information. But as we put together a budget for fiscal year 22, we don't have that constraint. We need to do this in a more learned way.
You have my agreement there. But my point is, so I'm looking at the challenges and I'm just letting everybody know this is the bigger gap that I've seen. So the question is, as you embark on guidelines, because I haven't heard anything from any of my budget committee members on what they think a mill rate might look like or what they think it might go. You've asked Roland to prepare sort of a snapshot. We do these all the time. I think Ms. Tarkington's focusing on fixed charges because obviously there are things that we don't have control of. We have to do the pension, we have to do healthcare, we have to do those things. We know that. So the question is, where I was going is, we need to define exactly what I call non-negotiable. In other words, the pension obligation. We have no choice in that, correct? We have to make that contribution. Am I right? So what I was trying to say is, I think as if in this year we have to separate what's non-negotiable. In other words, we have to do Nathaniel Willow, we have to fill that account. We have to do healthcare, OPEB, pension, whatever it is. So I think that's a different approach than we've had in the past. Let's separate that stuff out so we can then work from there. That may be a help. That's what I was trying to get to.
So that's what basically, by putting most of those fixed charges on there, they really aren't very negotiable. If there's one that is, it's probably the discount rate on the pension fund. That decision may have been voted one way, but the actuary report isn't in. And quite frankly, I find it amazing that people can vote and not be talking with their department heads or whatever in terms of the overall. You're right. And on covering all these points, Mike, it's a difficult year. I think Jeff is expressing it from a different standpoint. So is Leslie. But the bottom line is we have to, Jeff quoted what part of Jim Lash that he wanted to quote, but the bottom line is, why do people come to Greenwich? Maybe schools are one of those key reasons. Also low taxes. And we need to understand that. And we need to have taxes here that are going to work, deliver whatever services we can under that, make sure we're covering the needs of our residents under the COVID. Again, I hope we'll be recovering from it. But, I'm not sure about that yet. So, I think critical is to, let's get that into operating guidelines, move that as the next step. And you'll be hearing lots from us over the next several weeks. So it's a very, very busy time, and we will all be working hard, I think. And everyone's view is very important here. And we do need to come to something that works. And, you know, I mean, it's very clear, we haven't delivered all the services that, that people were used to in the past. And yet, you know, it's worked out for the town. And I think that is the way everyone's worked together in the past. And we'll see that again moving forward. So with that, do we have a motion to adjourn, or is there, Leslie or Jeff, do you have any more comments? Are we ready to move on?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
And I'll second it.
Okay, and so that's a 3-0 vote. And I thank you all. And Jeff, we'll hear from you soon.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.